Chapter 711. Coincidentally, Orgrim was asking Guile the same question in the cellar of Brill's Colosseum. Do you still remember the 3 questions I asked you? Yes. You asked who are you? Where are you from? Where are you going? Guile replied in a steady voice. Then have you thought of the answer? Yes, I have. Guile's voice was sonorous and powerful. Speak. Guile stood up abruptly and spoke in the orc language with a thunderous might. I am Guile, the son of the great Frostwolf tribe chief Durotan, and the powerful female warrior Draka. I come from the other side of the dark portal, the planet that the humans call Draenor. I want to lead my orc brethren to escape from the human slavery, and go to a place where the orcs can rest. On the other side of the wall, Orgrim also stood up excitedly. He and Guile had their backs against each other. Even though there was only a thin wall between them, he could feel the warmth from Guile's back through the wall, and into his heart. Very good. Very good. If Durotan and Draka could see you in such a heroic state, they would definitely be very happy. Orgrim was very pleased. Does my answer have anything to do with that Duke Marcus you mentioned? If he's such an important person, why haven't I heard of his name in all my years in Lordaeron? Because his name is a taboo in Lordaeron. Orgrim spent a whole hour explaining how Duke had used a series of methods to destroy the Horde's attack, as well as the relationship between the Alliance and Lordaeron, as well as the relationship between Duke and King Tyrreenus. Guile frowned. If this Duke is really so terrifying, then he will indeed be the biggest obstacle to our tribe's rebirth. But didn't you say that he's been missing for 10 years, and the Alliance has marked him as a dead man? Why do we still have to worry about him? Orgrim sighed. Some people are still alive, but he's already dead. Like Tyrreenus Menethil. I can even deal with an old fool like him. However, there is a type of person who is more terrifying in death than in life. This type of person is Duke Marcus. Orgrim's gaze seemed to pierce through the dark tunnel, through the boundless sky, back to the glorious days of war. After a long time he said, if it's just Rotterdam, we only need to rescue our compatriots. We alone are enough to overthrow this country. However, things were different with the addition of the Eastern Kingdom. That is a completely different, higher-level world. A higher level? Have you ever seen a sailboat on Lordemere Lake? Yes. Do you know that the southern continent is using steamships with smoke coming out from the top of the ship? Do you know that the southern continent can transport 10,000 soldiers at a speed faster than a horse for 1,000 miles in a day and a night? Do you know that humans can make 1,000 of the sharpest swords in an hour? And those cannons that can destroy a small mountain? Guile fell silent. This is the new thing that the man named Duke Marcus has brought to the world of Azeroth. Orgrim looked dispirited. My body is not old, but my brain can no longer keep up with the new things. I only know that if we fight for freedom in the old ways, it will only bring true destruction to the orcs and the Horde. So, I put my hope in you, the person that the shaman prophesied. I hope that you can lead the orcs out of this cruel fate. I will, Guile said without hesitation. Do you have any other suggestions? Do in the main what you think. My last suggestion came from the shaman who persuaded me to protect you. He hoped that you would change your name to Thrall, on the day of your rebellion. Thrall? Guile was confused. That was the name my subordinates gave you when they transferred you out of another slave camp. It was the name given to you by Lord Blackmore of Gaerton. Why do I have to use the name given to me by a human slave master? Guile was filled with indescribable anger. Because this is a name of destiny. It represents the knowledge you have learned from humans, your integration with human culture, and your true destiny. Orgrim's voice became very solemn. Believe in the Lord. If not for his great sacrifice, you would have been killed by the assassins sent by Duke 13 years ago. Only by returning to destiny will the God of destiny protect you. Alright, I agree. From today onwards, my name is Thrall. Guile no, Thrall replied loudly. Very well. You will not regret this, child of Durotan. I will leave the rest to you. Yes, orcs will never be slaves. Thrall gripped his axe tightly. At the same time, the young man who appeared in the lightning looked like he was in pain. He stood up with difficulty. F***CK, I've actually become Arnold Schwarzenegger. The young man looked around. Sigh, luckily there is no one around. Otherwise, I would definitely be treated as a pervert. As soon as he tried to move, his first movement made him stagger and he almost fell. It was obvious that he was not used to his body. My body. He looked down. His sword was still there. Even without testing, he knew it was normal. Damn, the wind blew the eggs cold. Since it was functioning normally, the other tests could be ignored. No. After checking again and again, he finally confirmed that his body was intact. He was surprised and happy. After suffering for so long, he had finally returned to Azeroth. Even though he had been through countless dangers and seen countless storms, he could not help but feel a little excited. Finally, he took a deep breath and shouted, "Ha ha ha! Azeroth! I do Hansan have returned to harm you." For a moment, the sky was filled with lightning and thunder. It was as if Azeroth could not wait to strike this scourge down. I must be joking. This is actually the aftermath of teleportation. Aftermath. Yes. He was the handsome duke that everyone hated. Flowers withered at the sight of him, and cars had flat tires at the sight of him. Taking a deep breath of the fresh air of Azeroth, Duque, who had experienced the cruelty of long-distance teleportation across the universe, finally realized his current situation. Damn, a lot of my magic circuits have been burned. F***ck, my storage bag is finished. Damn, I'm still naked. No, before thinking about that, I need to wash the dust off my body. It's so uncomfortable. Duque, who did not dare to use magic for the time being, ran to a nearby stream to take a bath. Just as Duque was washing up, a soft sound suddenly came from behind. Duque turned around and saw a girl looking at him in shock. The next moment, Duque complained, "Why are you peeping at me while I'm bathing?" Chapter 712. Once upon a time, before Duque had transmigrated, there had been such a fatty. It had been a large gathering, and many people had been assigned to various rooms in the hotel. One of the girls had probably been confused and remembered the wrong room number, thinking that it was her roommate inside. In the end, the girl rang the doorbell and found that the person who opened the door was a pale fatty with only a bath towel draped over his lower body. The scene was extremely awkward, but this guy was the first to react. He screamed, "Molestation!" He slammed the door shut, leaving the confused girl outside feeling extremely wronged. Right. Duke had done the same thing, but by different means. No matter what happened, he had to scare the other party first. Duke's words smashed into the white-haired girl's head, causing her to be dumbfounded. After a long time, she finally reacted. You. After saying you 3 times, she could not continue. The girl was obviously very pure, but she already looked like she was about to cry. Seeing this, Duque could not bear to see her like this. "Sorry, I was just joking." Duque's dog eyes unexpectedly saw this girl wearing a red priest's robe. It was summer, and her legs were very white. "Where are you looking?" The girl suddenly became alert and raised the staff in her hand. That's right, this was a naked man. What if he went berserk? No, you misunderstood. I saw that your clothes are very familiar. Are you from the Scarlet Crusade? Duque was not sure, so he asked tentatively. It's the Scarlet Crusade. The girl corrected. Actually, I'm not a member of the army. I just borrowed clothes to wear. The pure young girl's true colors were immediately revealed. Although Scarlet Crusade and Scarlet Crusade only had a difference of one word, the meaning was very different. The former was a fanatical organization, while the latter only represented a legion of the Kingdom of Lordaeron. Duque instantly grasped the general timeline. Seems like it's not too late for me to roll back. Sorry. I'm from the mountains. I lost a bet and was thrown into the water by my buddy, then washed down the river. Can I ask, what time is it now? Which year? Looking at Duque, who was half submerged in the water and giving off a suspicious aura, the young lady gripped her staff tightly and took half a step back. Her eyes were filled with wariness and distrust. However, she still answered Duque. It's year 15 of the Dark Portal. You're currently near Terran Mill in the Hillsbrad Hills. Mr. Suspicious. Hey, am I being despised? Am I, who is handsome, elegant, and charming, is being looked down upon? At this moment, Duque could not stop crying in his heart. 10,000 alpacas galloped through his mind. After a while, Duque came back to his senses. Sorry, I'm not the kind of person you think I am. The young girl was still vigilant. Her large watery eyes and white hair made her expression seem even colder. She was clearly saying that he was that kind of pervert. Duque lost his temper. You're a priest, right? For the sake of the holy light, can you get me a set of clothes? The young girl lightly pursed her bright red lips. Since the other party was already using the holy light, she finally nodded. She then faced Duque and took 3 steps back. After making sure that Duque could not jump out of the river, the young girl turned around and ran without looking back. Sigh. Just when Duque thought that the young girl would break her promise, and was about to use leaves to make a grass skirt to cover her body, the young girl still came back with a set of rough linen clothes, and a young man who acted as her protector. The young man was very tall and had a steady look, but his short beard revealed that he was less than 16 years old. His trembling left hand on the hilt of his sword revealed his guilt. Of course, Duque would not do anything to them. When the young girl turned around, Duque quickly went ashore and used the cloth that the young man had left on the shore to dry his body. He then put on the rough linen clothes that he had not worn for many years. Ugh, what a nostalgic feeling. When I first transmigrated, I seemed to have worn this too. Seeing that although Duque's origins were strange, he did not seem to have any ill intentions, the young man slightly lowered his guard. Mister, may I ask what your name is? Duque. Duque casually replied. What about you guys? Thank you for your help. I would like to at least know your names. Reynolds. Sorry. The young boy and girl only said their names, but just like Duque, they purposely ignored their surnames. However, when Sari heard Duque's name, she revealed a look of yearning. Ah, you're also called Duque. After the last great battle, many people's children are called Duque. Hearing this, Duque could not help but smile. In the entire world, there is only one Duque, Reynolds said solemnly. Sari did not refute. All right, as a knight candidate, I cannot sit by and watch a stranger wander around here alone. After all, it is not safe around here recently. Mr. Duque, I strongly suggest that you come with us, Reynolds suddenly said. Not safe. Hearing this, Duque frowned. Yes, this is not confirmed news. However, there have been many strange humanoid monsters recently. What kind of monsters are they? They look like humans, but they eat and bite people. They have dark gray skin. Duque's expression suddenly changed. Damn, the Scourge army has appeared? This is really bad news. Duque found that he could not determine what time it was. However, it was obvious that Nazul had begun to exert his power as the Lich King. However, whether it was the cursing sect secretly stirring up trouble, or Arthas had already fallen, this was still unknown. Let's go. Bring me to Alexandros Mograine or Alfred Abendis. Duque's expression darkened. He turned around and walked away, not caring if the boy and girl followed him or not. After living in Azeroth for so long, experiencing 3 big battles and facing countless hardships, Duque knew what he had to do. Upon hearing these 2 names abruptly, the young Reynolds seemed to have been greatly stimulated. He looked like he was startled. In the Scarlet Cross army, it was impossible for the boy and girl not to know what these 2 names meant. What shocked them was Duque's tone. After all, these 2 lords weren't just any Tom, Dick, or Harry. Looking at the whole world, how many people would dare to call them by their names? However, this mysterious Duque dared to do so. He really wanted to scold this Duque. How dare you? However, the man's natural and typical aura of a superior made Reynolds involuntarily obey the man's lofty orders. This way. Chapter 7:13. Walking on the narrow path in the forest, Duque had a lot on his mind. Yes, he had returned, but he was in a terrible state. Although he looked fine on the outside, he was the only one who knew how hard it had been to play interstellar travel. He was the first to come back. He had to do this. Karazhan was wrapped in a spider web of countless spatial cracks in the depths of the space-time tunnel. Apart from him, no one else could come out. Although Alexstrasza could transform into human form, the amount of mana needed to teleport her was too great. Apart from her, no one else was good at magic. Although Khadgar was much stronger, the problem was that this ghost mage was almost an earthbound spirit, and it was difficult for him to leave Karazhan. In the end, after being trapped for too long, Duque still teleported back alone after preparing for a long time. It had been an extremely dangerous journey. Even with the help of the system elf, Duque had almost died in the void. After all, there were many times when one had to change directions at supersonic speeds 3 or 4 times in a second. This was really not something a human could do. But after returning, Duque had 2 serious problems. First, he had burned many magic circuits. Roughly speaking, his power had temporarily fallen to the level of an ordinary radiant moon mage. But if he was given some time to reorganize his magic circuits, it should not be a problem for him to rush back to the half-step breaking dawn he had once achieved in Karazhan. Second, the system elf seemed to have gone silent. No matter how he called out, there was no response. He did not know whether it was the solar storm or the influence of the spatial magnetic field, but the system elf was temporarily on its knees. Both greatly affected Duque's strength. As Duque walked, he asked Renaud about the current situation. Even though he had scared Renaud still tried to answer his questions carefully and selectively. Through Renaud, Duque at least learned a few important pieces of information. Over the past 10 years, Rotterdam had been constantly nibbling away at the original Alterac territory. Now, apart from South Shore, which had been upgraded to the South Sea city-state and gained autonomy, the rest of the territory basically belonged to Rotterdam. However, the shattered ridge that was originally part of Alterac Royal City was abandoned by the Rotterdam Kingdom, due to the large number of snowmen occupying it, and the fact that they had failed to clear it out many times. King Langren was assassinated by an orc sword saint in the 8th year of the Dark Portal. Since then, Anjouan Lothar had been the regent to assist the young King William. However, in the past 2 years, Duke Bolvar for Dragon had been the regent due to Lothar's poor health. When he heard Reynolds say that the holy city of Stratholme was fine, Duque felt a little relieved. In that case, according to the original history, Arthas should not have fallen. If that was the case, the situation did not seem to be the worst. However, when Duque asked about Earthes' situation, Reynolds became even more vigilant. "Didn't you tell Sally that you were from the mountains? Why do you care so much about Earthes?" Duque felt wronged. Duque was rather speechless at the vigilance of this pair of underage boys and girls. Just as Duque was about to say something, the wind suddenly brought with it a terrible stench. Sally covered her mouth, and even Reynolds, who looked like a protector, had a hard time holding back the urge to vomit. It was the unique smell of a slaughterhouse, with a hint of disgusting sweetness. No, it was not the smell of fresh meat, but the stench of rotting corpses. It had been too long since Duque had smelled something like this. Only after burying corpses on the battlefield for a few days would there be such a smell. The rotting smell came from a house near the forest path. It was now very clear what had happened inside. Sally turned to Reynolds. Her face was pale but determined. "I have to go in and check. If there are dead souls inside that I need to expiate." Suddenly, along with the poisonous gas of death, a horrifying shriek filled the entire forest. Something pounced at them from inside, and behind the house at an alarming speed. Without hesitation, Reynolds immediately pulled out the sword at his waist and pointed it at the intruder with a trembling sword tip. Following the light from the tip of the sword, Reynolds' eyes met a pair of pitch-black eye sockets. Reynolds, who had never been on a real battlefield, was shocked to find that he did not know how to react to this walking nightmare. It wore a tattered shirt and work clothes, holding a pitchfork as a weapon. It should have been a farmer in the past, but that was when it was alive. Right now, it was clearly a dead person. Grayish-green rotting flesh fell off its bones, and rotten fingers left filthy marks on the handle of the pitchfork. Black sticky liquid flowed out of the pustules. It howled, stinking saliva dripping from the corner of its black mouth. Sally cried out in alarm. This cry seemed to have frightened Reynolds. He was stunned for a moment, and almost couldn't raise his sword in time before he was stabbed by the pitchfork. Fortunately, his years of training had formed his body's combat instincts. He managed to knock the pitchfork out of the zombie's hand with his sharp sword, and then he swung his sword horizontally across the zombie's neck. The neck that had lost its tenacity gave Reynolds a disgusting feeling, as though he had cut a pile of rotten grass. Then, the filthy head flew into the air, and a stinking liquid sprayed out from the severed neck, splattering half of Reynolds' face. After losing its head, the thing fell flat on its back and never got up again. As a priest in training, Sally used a holy light spell. Even though she knocked down a zombie, it was replaced by even more zombies. This was far more than what the two of them could handle. "Sally, run!" Reynolds cried out in alarm. Even though his hands were trembling, he still chose to let the lady run first. At this moment, the two of them suddenly heard whooshing sounds. It was the sound of something breaking through the air. Countless fireballs flew past them, hitting the bodies of the swarming zombies. The fireballs exploded, and while the disgusting monsters were blown away, the stench in the air was immediately replaced by the smell of burnt flesh. The noisy roars of the monsters had been reduced by 90%, and the clearest sound in the air was the crackling of the flames. In the distance, more zombies tried to rush over. Reynolds and Sally looked back at the same time, only to see 10 small flames burning steadily on Duque's slender fingertips, like 10 harmless orange flowers. The next moment, the flames poured out, turning into huge fireballs the size of water tanks that smashed towards the group of monsters. In a few moments, dozens of monsters were kneeling. Sally asked in a trembling voice, "Who are you?" Chapter 7:14. This was not an ordinary fireball. It was summer, and an ordinary fireball could easily cause a forest fire. However, Duque's fireball was different. The fireball looked huge, and as soon as it hit, the zombies were instantly set ablaze. Even Reynolds and Sally, who were more than 10 meters away, subconsciously raised their hands to shield themselves from the scorching heat wave. Just this power alone was enough to be more powerful than any master mage they had ever seen. They wanted to observe Duque, the mysterious young mage, but the situation with the zombies quickly forced them to turn their attention. Originally, Reynolds wanted to finish them off with a sword, such as killing the zombies that were not completely destroyed by the flames and were still charging at them. Zombies did not feel pain. If they were really caught by a burning zombie, then the flames on their bodies would become a fatal weapon to kill Reynolds. However, Duque's fireball had unimaginable power. The flames quickly charred the zombies' muscles, turning them into human-shaped ashes. Strangely, before the zombies fell to the ground, the flames on their bodies would be extinguished. Soon everything was silent. There were no unpleasant roars from the zombies, no twitching of the zombies, not even the sound of flames gnawing on corpses or wooden houses. The hot summer wind blew slowly, making a sigh in the forest. No matter who this mysterious young mage called Duque was, Reynolds and Sally were glad to see that the zombies were all burned to ashes. Duque did not answer Sally's question about who he was. He did not look good. He had thought that he had returned early. At least the Scourge army had not started to wreak havoc, so there should be no big problem. After all, Kel'Thuzad had been tricked by Duque more than 10 years ago, and even his soul had been worn away by the holy light. Even if there was a cursing sect, they should not be too strong. Now, it did not seem to be the case. This was not the level of the cursing sect using human subjects for experiments. This should be considered the outbreak of the Scourge, even if it was only in the early stages. Suddenly, the sound of fierce fighting came with the wind. There were people being attacked, and there were quite a few of them. Duque frowned and turned his head. "Protect yourselves." Without looking back, he used blink to leave. It was a blink that covered a distance of more than 30 meters. When Duque reappeared 30 meters away, he seemed to curse, ran a few steps, and then blink again. In their eyes, Duque was already a monstrous existence. Reynolds turned his head. "If he had wanted to make a move on you not long ago," Sally smiled bitterly. "How would I know? Fortunately, he is on the side of the humans. What do we do now?" Sally said firmly, "Follow them." "But we're not here to. We're just trainees. The order wasn't given to us, was it? As a believer of the holy light, I cannot allow myself to stand by and do nothing." Sally smiled, and her snow-white short hair gave off a kind of holiness that Reynolds had always been secretly fascinated by. Reynolds roughly wiped off the disgusting liquid that stuck to his body and sword, and ran in the direction that Duque disappeared in. It didn't take them long to reach their destination. It was a very tragic battlefield. On the main road, there were at least hundreds of zombies surrounding a carriage. The carriage should belong to a high noble, because other than high nobles, no one would have more than 30 guards and a magician as a bodyguard. This team of guards looked well trained, but the difference in strength between them and the enemy was too great. If it wasn't for the huge fireballs that kept shooting out from the carriage, the pitiful circular formation of the guards would have been broken long ago. Even so, looking at the huge crisscrossing claw marks on the carriage, one could tell that the line of defense of the carriage had actually been broken. A chill rose from Reynolds' tailbone to his head. Damn it. This is the main road that connects the Dalajan and Torrential Fortress. I just passed by here yesterday. When did there become so many living dead? The only fortunate thing was that with Duca's arrival, the situation of the caravan being besieged had changed greatly. 3 firewalls rose outside the carriage, and every zombie that dared to rush into the firewalls would be burned to ashes within a few steps, turning into a pile of black charcoal. Even though the zombies were still charging at the carriage, the guards of the carriage let out a sigh of relief when an advanced magician came to their rescue. Standing on the hill, Duque flicked his fingers continuously, and fireballs rained down on the group of zombies. Each fireball was just right, and several zombies were instantly smashed into pieces. After a few minutes, the world was quiet. After the firewalls were down, 2 of the surviving guards walked over, as if they wanted to thank Duque. However, Duque used flash, bypassed the 2 guards, and went straight to the front of the carriage. His sudden action caused the guards to be on their guard. These days, the world was not fair. Not everyone who would stand by and watch someone die was a scoundrel. Not everyone who saved you must be a saint. The remaining guards did not raise their swords, but each of them looked at Duque with vigilance. Although these faces were young, and none of them were middle-aged, their calm aura told Duque that each of them had been on the battlefield and seen blood. This, Sir Magician. Seeing Duque's linen clothes, the leader of the guards could not associate Duque with those noble magicians who wore luxurious magician robes. Unfortunately, Duque's powerful magic was an indisputable fact. Therefore, the leader of the guards tried to use more respectful and tactful words. Duque was very excited. Yes, that's right. It had been 10 years since he left the world of Azeroth. Although 10 years could not be said to have changed the world, many things had changed greatly. For example, the death of King Lang. He did not know how many traces he had left in this world. In front of him was a group of guards who had hidden their markings, but when he saw the familiar insignia on the guards' bodies, he could no longer control his emotions. Ignoring the nervous guards, Duque walked to the carriage with his head held high and cleared his throat. An old friend is visiting. Excuse me, who is the current head of the Marcus family in Stormwind? There was silence in the carriage, but 3 seconds later, an excited female voice was heard. It was me, but now, it's you. Ha! Before Duque could react, he only saw the carriage door suddenly burst open, and then a slim figure like a moth flying into a flame, threw herself at Duque. The confused Duque had a terrible intimate contact with the back of his head against the black ground. The next moment he felt a soft and sweet touch on his lips. Chapter 7:15. This was a bloody battlefield that had just been visited by death and evil. This was a horrifying place with countless corpses. But it was in such an unnatural place that the guards realized that their goddess, for the first time, was like an ordinary woman who had fallen into the mortal world. 10 years ago, when Alterac was swept by the flames of war, even the king was humiliated, and the country was annexed, when they lost their parents, lost their loved ones, lost a shelter, and were about to starve to death on the streets. It was this holy girl who was like a goddess who saved their lives and souls, gave them food, gave them warmth, gave them life and a future. This was not an unconditional redemption, and they had to give up their future for it. They were willing to accept it, because without the present, there would be no future. They quietly received the strictest training, and endured the torment that ordinary children had never experienced, all for the sake of protecting this woman who was not much older than them, but had saved them. In their hearts, this noble lady was their goddess. They watched her manage such a large territory, watched her lead the people, and brought life back to the land that had been destroyed by the flames of war. But they had never seen her, who was as beautiful as a goddess, truly smile at any man. Countless nobles had proposed to her, and even Prince Stromgard had once favored her, but without exception, all of them had been firmly rejected. In the face of any man's ambiguous invitation, she would become the most unreasonable ice goddess. That was good. It was as if an extraordinary woman like her should not be owned by any ordinary man. The young guards looked at her with longing in their eyes as they quietly stood guard by her side. 10 years. She had never had any scandals. She was a mage, but she was more like a saint than any female priest in the Church of Holy Light. It was precisely because of this that she abruptly, without any warning, threw herself at the man in coarse linen clothes, and unreservedly offered her own passionate kiss. Ah. Their tongues intertwined passionately. The guards were stunned, but at the same time, they found it hard to believe that their goddess had fallen in love with a hero who had saved her. Duque, who was at the bottom, almost suffocated. The strong love from her made him intoxicated, but also made him embarrassed. She had no intention of stopping, and Duque had to pat her back a few times. No response. He pretended not to feel it. Continued to attack. That lilac tongue continued to attack the city and sweep the ground. There were a few more claps, accompanied by the sound of a serious cough. She finally propped herself up reluctantly, and saw the continuous silver thread between their lips and tongues. Both of them blushed a little. Damn it. You don't have to do this. Alicia. Duque had an awkward expression on his face. That's right. This noble lady was naturally Miss Alicia Barov. What the hell? I should be the one saying this. You bastard. I've been gone for 10 years. Alicia's face was full of resentment. Kil'jaeden secretly gave Nazul a super bomb. Even Karazhan was blown away. Duque said innocently, I know it's not your fault. Alicia's waterfall-like soft black hair fell on Duque's cheek, tickling Duque. At this point, Alicia's voice suddenly became smaller. It was a mosquito's hum that only Duque could hear. You promised to give me a coming-of-age ceremony, but you're 10 years late. This is the truth. Duque was speechless. Because she was kneeling, her neckline hung down. At this angle, Alicia's mature female body was almost completely exposed. She was obviously so shy that she was about to explode. Her pretty face and neck were covered in crimson, but Alicia did not adjust her posture. She wanted Duque to see to his heart's content. She had indeed grown. The once unripe fruit had become a ripe peach. It was obvious that Alicia had been working out. That was not the healthy figure that a female magician should have. And because Alicia had eternal life, her body's age would forever be solidified when she was young. Duque swallowed his saliva. At this time, Reynolds and Sally, who were not far away, were completely dumbfounded. Reynolds said, That seems to be Marchioness Alicia Barov of Stormwind. What a beautiful person. How did she get together with Duque? Oh my God. They kissed. Sally held her face in her hands. She knew that her face was burning. Girls love heroes. The scene in front of them was a hero saving a damsel in distress, followed by a beauty falling in love with him. This was the template of a night novel. The corner of Reynolds' mouth twitched. He was a little unconvinced, but he could not be unconvinced. With such a large number of zombies in front of him, he would die of exhaustion if he just stood still and let him cut them down. They were not like mages, who could throw a bunch of fireballs and the world would be peaceful. He had also thought too highly of mages. Only Duque could be so awesome, and a half-crippled Duque at that. On the other side, although Duque was very happy that Alicia still loved him and waited for him for a full 10 years, he still did not forget the urgency of the situation. Let's put it aside for now. We still have a long way to go. Hearing the words, we still have a long way to go, Alicia's face became even redder. Alicia, tell me first, what happened? When did these zombies appear? What's the situation in the various countries now? Duque asked quickly. Alicia hurriedly stood up. She quickly combed her beautiful black hair. In just 3 short seconds, she had once again entered the role of the strong woman who replaced Duque to control the Marcus family. The appearance of zombies happened last summer in July. At that time, It was only an isolated case. Lordaeron strongly condemned it, saying that it was the result of the Dalajan's forbidden experiments. After all, 10 years ago, small undead creatures such as rabbits began to appear near the Dalajan, even though they claimed that they had all been killed at that time. Damn, it was Kel'Thuzad's fault. Alucia continued. I have been paying attention to the situation here according to your instructions. Southshore is also a spy that we left behind. This time, I came here to deal with the unstable orcs. There is evidence that the orc slaves are organizing a riot. Duque was stunned. What the hell? The Scourge army was about to move. Why did the orcs suddenly start a slave uprising? Wouldn't that mean that Thrall was going to make an appearance? The Scarlet Cross army was specially mobilized. If it wasn't for such a major event, Tyrenas would not want to let Lordaeron's signature army leave Lordaeron when the prince returns in triumph. Wait! Duke suddenly had an ominous feeling that something bad was about to happen. Chapter 7:16. Duque had harmed Azeroth, saved powerful people, cheated orcs, harmed demons, and was cheated by demons. In any case, the original course of history of Azeroth had long been changed beyond recognition. Without the system elf statistics, Duque did not know how similar Azeroth was over the past 10 years. Anyway, even if Kael, that's jumped out and said that he was not a prince, but a princess, and begged Kil'jaeden to keep him, Duque would still try to believe him. The world had collapsed quite a bit, so it was not a big deal. Duque did not know why there was no scene of Prince Arthas slaughtering Stratholme and beginning to fall into depravity. But he remembered very clearly that Arthas' return from Northrend was the symbolic event when he led the Scourge army onto the main stage of Azeroth's history for the first time. Duque suddenly became nervous. He grabbed Alucia's arms tightly. Wait, are you talking about the triumphant return of Prince Arthas? Alucia's clear eyes widened as she looked at Duque with slight confusion. 10 years. In her impression, Duque was perfect. He could summon clouds with a flip of his hand and rain with another. While talking and laughing, he had burned the orc army of 1,000,000 to ashes. In an understatement, he had reversed the fate of the Bear of Family and killed the ancient evil dragon, Deathwing Nesario. In her impression, there were not many things that could make Duque so nervous. If Duque was like this, it was either that Duque, who had not seen him for 10 years, had become an ordinary person, or that it was a very important matter. Alucia, who had been guarding the territory of the Elven Forest for Duque, did not hesitate to believe that it was the latter. After pulling Duque into the carriage, Alucia quickly reported the recent situation to Duque. Unlike Reynolds' hesitant and timid exchange of information, this was an unreserved disclosure. This starts from the resurrection of the Medivh, who warned the countries as a prophet. Why did it sound like history had returned to square one? In the end, Medivh was resurrected by his omnipotent mother. He had just been resurrected, and although Medivh didn't have that heaven-defying magic power, he was still a radiant moon. He first turned into a crow and flew to the various kingdoms to warn the various kings. The Burning Legion's new plot was about to be launched, and the only chance to avoid the danger was to move the entire kingdom away from the eastern kingdoms to the other side of the sea, to the continent of Kalimdor, which was still a barren land. However, not a single king was willing to believe him. Forget about the fact that Medivh had lured the orcs into the dark portal when he was being controlled. Just the fact that he had come back to life was enough for any king to be suspicious of him, let alone his exaggerated statement. Move the entire country? What kind of joke was this? How could the migration of 1,000,000 people be easy? Back in the Stormwind, they were beaten like dogs, and even the capital city was destroyed. Who would take a boat to cross the sea to escape? In this world where land was their lifeline, the king scoffed at Medivh's warning. The only one who had a slightly positive response was Stormwind. Anduin Lothar, who was on sick leave, warmly received his old friend. After a conversation, Anduin was extremely sure that his old friend had really come back to life. This was definitely a great comfort to Lothar, who had no children, and whose only friend Lang had died and Duque had gone missing in the void. Then, after listening to Medivh's statement, Anduin summoned Regent Bolvar, and even asked Alucia, who had replaced Duque in the internal affairs, and King Varian, who was almost an adult, to discuss the matter. In the end, he still rejected Mediva's proposal. Firstly, it was difficult to leave one's homeland, and secondly, before Duque sent Alugia away from Karazhan, he had left behind a lot of backup plans. After knowing that his old friend had long been prepared, and was very confident in protecting the country, Mediv did not insist anymore. After informing all the kings, Mediva's figure disappeared from the vision of the nobles of the various countries. Not long after, all kinds of crises came unexpectedly. The first was the rebellion of the orcs. After 10 years of recuperation, coupled with the fact that the countries led by the Rotterdam Kingdom did not strictly adhere to the plan of extermination that Duque had set for the orcs back then. After all, the orcs had recovered a lot of vitality. Moreover, because the orcs no longer consumed the blood of demons, their tempers were not as violent as in the old tribes. In the end, many compassionate Virgin Mary secretly condoned and released the orcs, causing the total number of orcs to break the 200,000 mark again. Of course, that was the number that Alugia had calculated. The nobles of the Rotterdam Kingdom who used the orcs to play gladiatorial games all day would only be idiots to see that the total number of orcs did not seem to be that many. The orcs had all gone to the wilderness, so of course, there were not many orcs within the jurisdiction of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Then it was the rise of the Calamity Army that was the highlight. Just like what Duque knew in history, it was Kel'Thuzad who had sought refuge with the Lich King who spread the plague. However, because Kuthuzad had been tricked by Duque back then, even though his power had been resurrected by the Lich King, his power was no longer the same. He had completely become a schemer. He had spread the plague throughout the entire Eastern Kingdom, but had only succeeded in the Rotterdam Kingdom in the north. It was not that his subordinates from the cursing sect had not tried to poison within the borders of Stormwind. Unfortunately, a set of health and epidemic prevention system that he did not understand at all caused his people to show their true colors easily. Following Duque's teachings, Alugia directly asked her subordinates to use the holy light to interrogate the human traitors who had sought refuge with the Calamity Army. The plague raged within the borders of the Rotterdam Kingdom as expected, and because of Duque's other backup plan, the entire Stratholme was strictly guarded. As a result, no residents were infected, and there was no massacre of the city that should have happened in history. However, fate seemed to be mocking Duque. Duque had arranged everything 10 years in advance, but he was tricked by the river of fate, which secretly took a turn and circled back to the starting point. What? Arthas burned an orphanage and burned hundreds of infected children to death? Duque was silent. This could not be said to be Arthas's fault. Arthas was originally a good young man who loved his people and believed in the holy light. Unfortunately, he had been chosen by Nazul. Needless to say, Nazul was most likely played to death by Kil'jaeden, leaving only his soul in the ice, and then he promised to work for the Burning Legion. Nazul did not think that the treacherous Kil'jaeden would fulfill his original promise. He knew that once the mission was completed, he would lose his value and be abandoned by the Burning Legion. Therefore, he had been looking for a body that he liked, a victim that wandered between light and darkness. As long as he could occupy that body, he could escape from the imprisonment of the Frost Throne. He had his eyes on Arthas Menethil, a noble prince. Chapter 7:17. When someone was working hard to satisfy their desires, they would do their best, and even deviate from some of their own principles of life. In history, there were countless people who used unscrupulous means to achieve their goals. Arthas had such a sign at this time. Under such circumstances, once the fuse was lit, it was possible for people to lose themselves. After personally witnessing the infected soldiers turn into zombies, driven by anger and despair, Arthas gradually lost control. He burned down the orphanage, and when his teacher Uther and Jaina arrived to help, they could only see the church-like orphanage burning, and hear the desperate cries of the orphans before they died. Arthas fell into a trap. In the face of an evil plot, his honest and kind heart was finally covered with the dust of regret and guilt. No one knew that these dusts would slowly turn into a virus, reproduce by itself, and corrode his heart. Then the young prince, in the joint plot of the Dreadlord, Kel'Thuzad and the Lich King Nazul, was lured into an expedition to Northrend, and embarked on a path of no return. and his return meant that he had embarked on the path of a death knight. In the carriage, after listening to Alicia's report, Duque was speechless for a long time. If he had been in Azeroth, naturally, there would not have been the fall of Arthas. Unfortunately, he was blown away. Holding Alicia's soft and boneless hand, Duque sighed. When did Arthas' return happen? 3 days ago. However, in the last 3 days, we have lost contact with Lordaeron City, and no one has any news about Lordaeron City. Alicia's answer made Duque's heart sink. Was it still a step too late? Yes. Too late. 3 days ago, when fresh rose petals were scattered all over the streets of Lordaeron City, when the cheers of 100,000 people rang through the sky, no one would have thought that they would be greeted by a death god. Arthas killed the mastermind of the plague, Kel'Thuzad, beheaded the dreadlord Mal'Ganis, went on an expedition to Northrend, killed the mastermind who created the undead, and returned with a runic sword called Frostmourne. What a great achievement this was. What a divine miracle it was. The people were enthusiastically chanting Arthas's name. They longed for the heroic Arthas to ascend the throne after the death of the old king. In the reconstructed throne hall, Tirina's Menethil's throne was high up. He looked with satisfaction at Arthas, who was wearing a black hood and a black cloak, kneeling on one knee at the foot of the throne. Even though this prince had a crescent-shaped blade, a skull gauntlet, and an ominous rune sword, he had a strange aura about him. But in the eyes of Tirina's, who craved for glory, everything was valiant. 10 years, a full 10 years. Ever since the abominable Duke Marcus took away the dominant position of the Rotterdam Kingdom in the Alliance and the glory of the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom, someone from the Rotterdam Kingdom could finally stand up and become the new light of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Not the valiant Abendis. Fearless Mograine was no good. Not even the benevolent Archbishop Fail. Only his own son, the only legitimate heir of the Menethil royal family, Arthas Menethil, had the right to enjoy this great honor. Tirina's was very satisfied. He was so satisfied that he ignored all the warning signs of danger. He subconsciously ignored the reports of the prince's strange movements and too many troops from his subordinates. He also diverted Uther and his Silver Hand Knights, who had a disagreement with Arthas over the burning of the orphanage and the treatment of the plague victims. Tirina's, under the ridicule of fate, had sent himself to his death. Ah, my son. Tirina's happily stood up from the throne. However, Arthas's reply left him a little confused. You do not have to sacrifice yourself for your people anymore. You do not have to bear the heavy burden of the crown for them anymore. I have arranged everything. Ha! Tirina's was extremely shocked. What was this speech? At this moment, Prince Arthas, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly stood up and lifted his hood, revealing a pale face. The contours of his face had not changed. He was still the handsome Arthas Menethil, but his pale skin and snow-white hair made Tirina's even more shocked. Wasn't my son blonde? How did he become as old and white as me? While Tirina's was still in shock, Arthas held Frostmourne in his hand and strode up the stairs to the throne. Without the king's permission. It was very rude to step on the stairs to the throne without the king's permission. If it were someone else, the royal guards beside Tirina's would have already stopped them. But he was Arthas, the only heir of the Menethil royal family. With the king aging and not knowing how long he had left to live, Arthas was already the next king of Lordaeron. The guards hesitated. This hesitation destroyed Tirina's last hope. Tirina's, who was held by the neck by his precious son, trembled and asked, "What is this? My son, what are you doing?" "Inheriting your throne, my father." After saying that, he raised his sword, and the infamous Frostmourne pierced through the chest of the leader of the Alliance, the king of the largest kingdom in the Alliance for more than 30 years. The blood of the Menethil royal family flowed on the icy blade, and an evil hum echoed throughout the throne hall. At this moment, the millions of souls that died on Frostmourne let out the most tragic wails, and the will of the dreadlords attached to the sword was activated. Across the endless space, almost every dreadlord saw the scene of Arthas killing his own father. The dreadlords laughed maniacally. They were cheering the fall of a saint. They were laughing at the extreme ugliness of justice when it was twisted. This day was the victory of evil. This was the beginning of the Burning Legion's conquest of Azeroth. Their laughter, as well as that of the Lich King Nazul, echoed in the throne hall that had suddenly become dark because of the dark aura. The Death Knight Arthas did not notice, and his desolate voice echoed throughout the entire city. This kingdom is going to be destroyed. From the ruins, a new ruling order will be born. It will shake the foundations of everything in this world. Following the prince's declaration, all the magic circles in Lordaeron automatically activated, and powerful undying from Northrend poured out. Chapter 718. The ancient city of Rotterdam had been plunged into war for the second time ever since it was built. However, this time, Duque did not lead the army to rescue them. Due to the suppression of the Orc uprising a while ago, Rotterdam had sent almost all its combat troops. And because of the conflict between Uther and Arthas, the Silver Hand was also sent to Andoril, which was hundreds of kilometers away. The rest were all third-rate troops, and they were ambushed by their own people. The people of Rotterdam were stunned. In an instant, the bright sunshine above the city disappeared. The sudden cold clouds shrouded the entire city, and people were shocked to find that the world had suddenly turned from hot summer to cold winter. There were only clouds, with an evil aura left in the sky. The cold wind howled, and the atmosphere was lifeless. The pure white city wall was covered in a thick layer of ice at a speed visible to the naked eye. The enthusiastic scene of celebrating the triumphant return of His Royal Highness had long since disappeared. This was because the screams that rose and fell throughout the entire city had caused the people to fall into panic, and the screams were becoming more and more frequent. Ah! Monsters! City guards! Where are the city guards? Mom, I'm so scared. It was a mess everywhere, and the places a little further away from the city were dead. This was not an adjective, because everyone on the city walls and outside the city gates was dead. It was hard to guard against a thief in one's own house. As the only heir of the kingdom, there was nothing to hide from Arthas. In fact, the old king had been holding on to power in recent years, and there were still many things that he had begun to reveal to Arthas. Everything became the best nourishment for this feast of slaughter. The Undying, a terrifying existence from the Northrend icefield. They were fearless, ruthless, and did not need to breathe. They constantly created death, causing all lives to fall into the embrace of the Grim Reaper. Then they would immediately make the people who had just become dead stand up shakily, raise their knives, and slash at their comrades. All of a sudden, they went from the height of summer to a seemingly endless winter. There were undying beings everywhere, and that made the citizens of the Rotterdam Kingdom, who had lived a peaceful and dreamy life for more than 10 years after the Dark Portal, feel as if they had seen the end of the world. What happened next was supposed to happen in history, where the 300,000 soldiers and civilians of Rotterdam City would be slaughtered by Arthas' undying army. Arthas would then use the hundreds of thousands of soldiers to snowball and sweep across the entire northern continent. Just then, something unexpected happened that Arthas didn't expect. At first, he did not pay much attention to it. His Death Knights reported that the humans in the south of the city were resisting fiercely. Resist? So what if he resisted? The 3 largest barracks in Rotterdam City had been successfully attacked by the undead led by his Death Knights. Nearly 100,000 new and old undead soldiers began to charge into the city from the east, north, and west, besieging the living people in the city. But the situation was beyond the imagination of the dead king of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Run. There was a ship in the south. Once we get out of the south gate, we'll be able to live. Those damn monsters are everywhere on the land. Not only were there people shouting with amplification tools, but there were also countless places in the city, such as the landmark clock towers and tall towers, all of which had bright arrows made of flames. All the arrows pointed in a clear direction, south. At this time, a memory that was not too long ago surfaced in the minds of the people of Rotterdam. Evacuation drill. This was a plan that started 3 years after the Dark Portal. It was proposed by the deputy commander of the Alliance at that time, Duke Marcus. At that time, Duque said, in view of the fact that the capitals of 3 kingdoms in the Alliance were once breached, causing irreparable losses to the lives and property of the people, in order to avoid possible future dangers, I suggest that each kingdom formulate a special evacuation plan according to the structure of their own capital. In case there really is a need in the future, at least most people can escape. At that time, the kingdoms were busy with post-war reconstruction, compared to fighting for the land of Alterac and the right to speak in the Alliance military. This resolution that was unanimously passed by the kingdoms was only one of the hundreds of agreements the Alliance had reached over the years. When Duque was in power, he would lobby the kingdoms to hold a drill every summer. In the first 3 or 4 years after Duque disappeared, the kingdoms still held evacuation drills. After a long period of peace, the nobles of the kingdoms also became lazy. In the end, after 10 years, only Stormwind City, the Furnace Fort, and the Eagle Nest Mountain persisted. However, having done it before still left an impression. After the initial panic, the citizens of Rotterdam, especially those who had lived for more than 10 years, suddenly came to a realization. That's right. We did the drill before. Just do it according to the drill. People began to try to recall the contents of the drill. Humans had a herd mentality. When the first person followed the drill and ran towards the south of the city according to the direction indicated by the flaming arrow, more people immediately followed. The citizens were fleeing, but the killing continued. No one thought that the well-trained soldiers could not stop the Scourge army. The armed city guards could not do it either. The gladiators and fighters in the arena could not do it either. The one who stopped the Scourge army was the Marcus Trade Union. Strangely enough, under the leadership of the business master, Wuxia Barov, the Marcus Chamber of Commerce had opened a total of 36 branches in Lordaeron, where land was extremely expensive. Their businesses involved more than a dozen fields, but only one was their main business, and that was wine. They collected wheat from the rich land of Rotterdam, brewed it into various kinds of rice wine, and sold it. This was the magical part. After the initial panic, almost all of the shop owners suddenly yelled out, "Boss, boss! What are you panicking for? The monsters are coming, so act according to plan. Don't forget how the trade union trained you." Bottles of liquor were opened, and dry strips of white cloth were quickly stuffed into them. Then, boxes of liquor were pushed to the main roads by the trade union's workers. They waited with the trade union's guards. Whenever he saw an undying charging over, he would immediately light the cloth with a torch and toss the burning wine bottle at them. Bang bang! With a crisp sound, a large area was immediately engulfed in a sea of fire. Fire was the best way to deal with the undead. Under the flames, the advancement of the Scourge army was immediately seriously delayed. The undead, who could not feel pain, were still charging. Under the flames, their skin and muscles were quickly scorched. Ordinary zombies would usually fall after charging for less than 30 meters. Seeing this scene, the city guards of Rotterdam were dumbfounded. That's right. This was the specialty of the Marcus Trade Union, Molotov cocktail, also known as the indigenous incendiary bomb. Chapter 719. As a transmigrator, the most painful thing was knowing that a tragedy was about to happen, but not being able to stop it. Arthas was a classic example. 10 years ago, this noble prince was still a good young man, a pure and handsome man who believed in the holy light. Who would have thought that one day he would turn into a trap? He turned from a great holy knight to a death knight, and even stabbed his father in the back. Before Arthas officially turned against him, Duque could not tell the world. Yo! It was obvious that Arthas had a rebellious streak in the back of his head. Tyreenas, you should kill your only son as soon as possible, and get a younger queen to give birth to an heir. In order to prevent Arthas from turning from a loyal subject to a traitor, Duque had made a lot of preparations. Unfortunately, because Karazhan was accidentally blown up, Duque, who thought he still had a lot of time, could not proceed to the next stage of preparations. Fortunately, the foreshadowing was still laid. The Molotov cocktail, incendiary bombs that were extremely famous during World War II on Earth, were placed in the main commercial areas of Rotterdam in advance, legally, and grandly. If possible, Duque would have arranged for 100,000 holy knights to wait for Arthas to turn against him. Unfortunately, there were no 100,000 holy knights in the world, and Duque could not send weapons for battle to Lordaeron in advance. There were weapons shops selling swords to gladiators on the streets. But which weapon shop was not backed by the high nobles of Lordaeron? The fact that Duque's Chamber of Commerce could sell alcohol, and all kinds of luxury goods in Lordaeron, was already the result of Tarina's not falling out with them. Who would have thought that the bottles of liquor that were placed on the wine racks every day and watched by countless customers could be used to deal with the Calamity Army as long as they were lit on fire and thrown out with strips of cloth? The people of Lordaeron were stunned. In the end, some courageous city guards threw away their swords and took shields and incendiary bombs to fight the zombies. This bought precious time for the citizens to escape. In the south of the city, something magical happened again. Dozens of huge cylindrical towers were blown up by the dwarves' secretly planted explosives. This was not a tower made of bricks. Although it was crude, it was clearly a huge pipe made of pig iron. Its weight directly crushed the southern city wall. The south side of Lordaeron City was close to Lordaeron Lake, and its city walls were the weakest because the military port and commercial pier were right outside the city. With the protection of the coastal turrets, the southern city wall was the weakest. More than a dozen large pipes that could allow two people to pass through side by side collapsed, revealing an escape route. The citizens could escape from the city through the passageway. At this moment, under the command of the Marcus Merchant Guild's chief steward Makarov, the elite soldiers who were supposed to be the guards of the caravan also rushed over to open up a path for the citizens of Rotterdam City to escape. Makarov shouted, "Push the goods into the lake. Tie all the boxes that can float on the water to the back of the boat, and let the citizens carry them." Lake Lordamir was a super large lake with very developed water transportation, and its geographical location was very important. To the north was Rotterdam City, to the west was the Silverpine Forest that was being rebuilt, and to the south was the City of Magic, the City of Dalagen. To the southeast, one could pass through the Dalagen and directly reach the fertile Hillsbrad Hills. After 13 years of continuous development since the Dark Portal's second year, the scale of Lordaeron's pier was quite large. Goods from all over the north of Rotterdam were gathered here, transported to the south, and then transported from South Shore to the southern continent. The volume of goods handled was as high as 10,000 tons per day. This was not the modern pier from before Duquesne's transmigration. 10,000 tons was a very shocking number in this era. The docking of the mini-ships gave the citizens of Rotterdam their last hope to escape. Under the command of Duquesne's chief steward Makarov, the ships would leave as soon as they were full, never stopping. Later on, there was even a ship that set sail with a string of tails tied to the back of the ship. Anything that could carry people, such as floating logs and boxes, they set sail without delay. Unfortunately, as Arthas finally reacted to the situation, the retreat of the citizens became more and more difficult. First, huge spider-like creatures appeared in the south of the city. These were cave demons, creatures that had the genes of both humans and spiders. These cruel demons were once the lords of the ancient spider kingdom of Noscent, Ejonirab. When they spat out small spiders at the warriors who threw the Molotov cocktails, the line of defense that protected the citizens began to crumble. The fist-sized black spiders descended from the sky. Such long-range attacks were impossible to defend against in the dark of the night. As long as the spiders came into contact with them, the spiders had countless ways to kill a human warrior. The sharp mouthparts could easily bite through thin iron armor. The poisonous thorns would blister on the spot once they pierced into human skin. The poison in the thorns and mouthparts would invade the human nervous system and paralyze a strong human soldier in the shortest amount of time. Without the obstruction of the Molotov cocktails, the stagnant undead army once again surged forward like a raging tide. Makarov wanted to hold on for a while longer, but when he saw the liches appearing on the shore, he let out a long sigh. "We've done our best, let's retreat." Helplessly listening to the desperate cries and wails of the citizens, the merchant fleet began to leave the pier. There was no other choice. If they didn't leave now, none of them would be able to leave. The sailors and survivors on the ship didn't even dare to look back at the pier that had turned into a slaughterhouse. A human tragedy was unfolding there. Arthas was extremely displeased when he heard that more than 50,000 people managed to escape from Lordaeron. "Pass down my order. Get the gargoyles to attack and hunt down these survivors." It was obvious that this was another tragedy. Going back to the present, the area outside of Lordaeron was already in a mess. Because Arthas had brought back a large number of liches, coupled with the cursing sect's disciples lurking among the high nobles of Lordaeron. Outsiders thought that they had only lost contact with Lordaeron for 3 days. To the players, the Lordaeron army could have avoided being wiped out. In fact, players who looked at things from the perspective of God would never be able to understand the suffering of the Lordaeron army. This was an era where the hierarchy was strict and royal authority reigned supreme. Mobilizing an army without a military order was a capital offense. This was also an era where communication was terrible. After more than 10 years of development, the cost of sending magic messages was still rather high. After all, it would only be reliable if there was at least a sky mage on duty. Furthermore, there was the interference of the elemental waves in the atmosphere. Hence, unless it was an emergency or the level of the magic messenger was rather high, all military orders were not allowed to be sent using magic messages. Duque could totally imagine the suffering of the Lordaeron army. He patted Alicia's shoulder and said, "Let's go. Looks like I'm going to be the savior again." Chapter 720. What was a hero? A hero was a very vague definition. You couldn't be a hero just because you wanted to. A truly great hero couldn't be born in peaceful times. Only save a building from collapse, save the people from disaster. This was a true great hero. After 10 years, Duque's face seemed to be fixed at 20 years old. He was young, but had the unique calmness and wisdom in the world. His black eyes seemed to be able to see through the future. They were always so deep and enchanting. Alicia thought back to the past 10 years. She had taken care of the affairs of the Marcus family without a valid reason. She had suffered a lot. She had thought of giving up more than once. Every time she thought of her family gaining a new lease on life. Every time she thought of the irreplaceable importance of Duque's arrangements. Every time she woke up in the middle of the night, she would think of the incomplete love she had for Duque. Alicia managed to hold on. Now that she thought about it, it was really a miracle. Unknowingly, involuntarily, inside the carriage, Alicia once again stretched her fair neck and offered her red lips. Woo, Duque didn't refuse. He could clearly feel that the 2 peaks of the Bear family were more important than 10 years ago. If it wasn't for the fact that time didn't allow for romance, Duque really wanted to do Alicia right there and then. "Alright, since the Scarlet Cross is nearby, let's go find Mograine first," Duque ordered. It wasn't that Duque couldn't directly use magic to find someone, but it was useless. He had to first prove his identity and then find the person who knew the most about the Lordaeron continent's military intelligence. At this time, a timid female voice sounded. "Excuse me, are you Sir Duke Marcus?" Duque looked out of the carriage window and saw that it was Sally. Duque smiled. "If you're asking about the former Alliance Deputy Commander Duke Marcus, then you're right. It's me." "I'm very sorry." Sally bowed deeply. "I misunderstood you just now." As if recalling something, the silver-haired girl bowed once more. "Thank you for your help, sir. If not for you, Reynold and I would have died just now." "It's fine. I'm the one who's embarrassed." "Did I scare you like that?" Duque smiled bitterly. The young girl recalled Duque's naked appearance and immediately blushed. Reynolds, who was at the side, was truly shocked. Who would have thought that a seemingly perverted fellow was actually a great hero of the Alliance who had been missing for 10 years? However, he was not willing to lose just like that. He took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I heard that you wanted to go to the Scarlet Cross." "Yes." Duque nodded. "I can lead the way, please follow me." To Duque's surprise, the Scarlet Cross's encampment was actually less than 2 kilometers away. They would arrive after passing 2 hills. In front of the encampment's gate, which was decorated with red and white flags, Duque was not surprised to see a large number of undying corpses. Warriors in red armor were carefully finishing off the corpses. Even on the road, they would occasionally see corpses with only half of their bodies remaining, almost injuring people. Very soon they were stopped by a patrol squad. "Please stop. The encampment of the Scarlet Cross is in front. Please state your purpose." Reynold excitedly went up to them. "Reynold." Clearly, the patrol squad leader recognized Reynold. "Who are they?" "He's Sir Duke Marcus." Before Reynold could finish, the squad leader's expression turned cold, and he interrupted him on the spot. Are you kidding me? Sir Marcus has been listed as a war dead by the Alliance for more than 7 years. Turning around, the squad leader drew his sword and shouted, Soldiers! On alert! Immediately, there was the sound of swords being unsheathed, and the sword flashed like a forest. Reynold was in a bad mood. He had wanted to show off in front of Sally, but who knew that things would turn out like this? In the carriage, Duque frowned. Maugraine's army was strict, and it was extremely troublesome to verify their identities. Not to mention that all of his equipment had been destroyed when he teleported back, so there was no way he could have a token. Duque took a deep breath. There's no time to waste. Suddenly, a loud voice reverberated throughout the encampment. Alexandros, I know you have strict military discipline, but something big has happened. Tell your men not to stop me. That was a sound amplification spell. Generally, no magician would dare to use it in an encampment. This was because it was the same principle as the Roaring Court, in ancient times when Duque had transmigrated. But there was no time to waste. There was a commotion in the encampment, and the Scarlet Cross soldiers, who had long been prepared for battle, immediately rushed out. At this moment, another deep voice came from the main tent. Unlike Duque's trick, this was a simple, thunderous voice that created a shocking effect. Duque? Holy light above, did I see a ghost? Or did I really meet another resurrected one? Soldiers, listen up. Get out of the way, let him in quickly. The first half of the sentence was for Duque, and the second half was for the soldiers below to hear. The soldiers were extremely shocked. They had followed Lord Maugraine for so many years, but this was the first time they had heard their commander ignore military discipline and shout so intimately. The patrolling soldiers who had stopped Duque all had stern expressions. They all stepped aside and saluted at the side of the road. The wooden gate of the encampment suddenly opened, and the new soldiers were shocked to find that the veterans beside them were actually quickly tidying up their appearances. Sir, this is... Brat, polish your eyes. It's not every year that you get to witness the return of a legendary hero. 10 years had passed, but how many decades did one have in life? The veterans of those years had either died on the battlefield or returned home due to injuries. Most of those who remained in the army had become officers. No veteran who had experienced the Second Battle of the Dark Portal would forget the legendary name of Duke Marcus. Because this name represented victory. This name was full of wisdom. This name symbolized fearlessness. Every officer spontaneously stood beside the gate of the encampment. Not in the current military ranks, but in the ranks of the veterans of the past. The aura of a veteran mixed with the murderous aura of a veteran, but also from the bottom of their hearts. This complicated feeling infected every soldier, and they unconsciously lined up behind their superiors. Looking at the deputy commander of the Alliance, who was wearing a wizard robe and whose face had hardly changed, the veteran's eyes were brimming with tears. A guard of honor shouted, "To the legendary hero, His Excellency Duke Marcus." The next moment there was a tsunami of shouts. "To His Excellency Marcus." Chapter 721. Duque. It's really you? Two burly figures rushed over from the center of the camp. The first one to speak was Maugraine. "Hey, are you a Death Knight in disguise? I heard that the new Death Knight looks like a human." Abendis, who was closer to Duque, mocked Duque. Duque got off his horse and shrugged. "You can try using holy light against a Death Knight." Before Duque could finish his sentence, he was hit by a holy light. Duque felt like beating someone up. "Damn you, you really tried." "Sorry for now. Holy light is the best way to distinguish the living from the dead, as well as those damned cursed disciples." Maugraine's expression did not change. Then, in the next second, Maugraine's rigid and square face that was filled with the aura of a soldier seemed to have melted like ice. A rare smile appeared on his face. He opened his arms and gave Duque a firm bear hug. "Welcome back, Duque." Then Abendis gave him another bear hug. The cold armor made Duque's chest hurt, but Duque's heart was warm. Yes, it had been 10 years, but the mark he had left behind had not completely disappeared. This was what he was most proud of. At this time, Maugraine was shocked to see the two timid figures beside Duque. "Renaud, What are you doing in Sir Marcus' convoy? Father, The sharp-eyed old Mograine saw the battle marks on Renault's body and immediately became angry. I told you not to run out at a time like this. See, you've caused trouble for Sir Marcus, haven't you? No, Sally hurriedly defended Renault. Sir Mograine, it's my fault. I heard that an old granny is sick. I ran out of the barracks to treat the old granny without permission. But who knew that I would run into Sir Marcus? I ran into Sir Marcus. The words of the two juniors sounded like a bunch of lies. Old Mograine grew angrier as he listened. He was about to explode when Duque stopped him. I'm sorry, Alexandros. I destroyed all my equipment and clothes when I teleported here. It was your son and Miss Sally who helped me a lot. Old Mograine and Abendis' expressions turned strange. Wait, isn't this naked? Generally speaking, this was a very shameful thing. Unfortunately, Duque did not have this awareness at all. Never heard of it. A gentleman shows his balls, while a villain hides his penis. It couldn't be helped that he would drop his equipment and clothes during super long-distance teleportation. Duque shrugged. Yet even this mage robe was given to me by Wuxia. Obviously, this was a set of clothes in Duque's size. Old Mograine had a headache. Why was there so much information when Duque came back? In fact, Duque also had a lot of information. He did not expect that the boy and girl just now were also very famous. That's right, among the players, they had a very famous nickname, the Bloody Dog Couple. It was not that they were the kind of dog couple that defiled public morals. It was purely because they were bosses in a dungeon, and the players had gotten too much equipment for them. Somehow they had become a dog couple. However, in the original history, Renault Mograine was another example of someone who sold out. As for the girl named Sally, needless to say, she was definitely Sally Metwain, who was known as the White Legs. She was also a female character who was full of sadness, but also extremely popular. Throughout the history of Azeroth, Sally had spent most of her time in the Scarlet Crusade, a fanatical anti-Scourge army organization. However, in the end, when Bolvar Fordragon became the third Lich King and stood on the side of Azeroth, Sally became one of the 4 horsemen of the Apocalypse as a Death Knight, and became the main force against the Burning Legion. The White Legs. It was a pity that she became a madwoman, and then a Death Knight. Duque shook his head to get these thoughts out of his head. Alessandro, I'm a little late. Fortunately, it's not too late. Tell me the situation first. I need all the information. Old Mograine immediately welcomed Duque and Wuxia into the big tent anxiously. After asking about the situation of Theon and a few other old friends, Mograine quickly got to the main point. We're here to fight the orcs. The information we received was that there were more than 3,000 orcs preparing to cross the Alterac Mountains and attack Goldenhold Castle. However, we suddenly lost contact with Lordaeron. Thinking back to Prince Arthas' victory ceremony 3 days ago, we were afraid that the demons had attacked Lordaeron. Abendis added. To make matters worse, not only could the portal to Lordaeron not be opened, but we also lost contact with the messengers and Griffin Knights we sent back. Then a lot of undead suddenly appeared near the camp. Worst of all, they were originally residents of Terran Mill and the nearby area. Mograine gritted his teeth. If it wasn't for your sudden return, we would have been preparing to return to Lordaeron. Going back to die. Duque's plain words caused the temperature in the big tent to drop by 10 degrees. Mograine, Abendis, and more than 15 high-ranking officers' facial muscles stiffened. I received news that the entire Northrend expedition was a scam made by the demons. Arthas and his army were all wiped out. Everyone was shocked by Duque's words. Impossible. Mograine, the most loyal of the Menethil royal family, staggered and almost lost his balance. Duque, everyone in the North Stream port saw the prince's victory. This kind of thing. Abendis still had a sliver of hope. He hoped that this was just a bad joke. Duque shook his head. Arthas and his soldiers have returned, in the form of a Death Knight. He suddenly recalled his subordinate's report, which stated that most of Earthes' troops had been wearing hoods. Although they had claimed that they had suffered frostbite to their faces in the Northlands, and some of them had even suffered frostbite to the ears and had no choice but to cut them off. How could it be possible that thousands of people had suffered frostbite? Mograine suddenly felt the world spin. He suddenly felt like the whole world was collapsing. For a great minister who had served the Menethil royal family for generations, this news was too cruel. The only heir to the kingdom had become a Death Knight? He stared at Duque, hoping to see any signs of lying. Unfortunately, he was destined to be disappointed. Do you remember the emergency evacuation drill I announced before? If I'm not wrong, we will soon find survivors near Lake Lordaeron. Mograine's body shook violently, but he finally stood up straight. Duque, what's the worst possibility? Duque's words were like knives. Arthas will turn 3 million Lordaeron people into undead, and then sweep through the entire Lordaeron continent. Chapter 722. After Duque said this, all the generals trembled. Duque was by no means an alarmist. The Third War of the Dark Portal was the most destroyed kingdom since the establishment of the Alliance. According to the original history, Lordaeron, Dalagen, and Cuel Salis were all trampled by the Death Knights and destroyed. And Stromgarde, which had also left the Alliance a few years ago, although Rapidhold did not really fall this time, it was also greatly damaged, which directly led to the fragmentation of the entire kingdom. After the Third War, including Alterac, which had long been in decline, humans would officially go from 7 kingdoms to 3 pitiful kingdoms. Even if the Dalagen restored their kingdom later, the entire northern Lordaeron continent would be completely destroyed in the Eastern Kingdom. Having seen the power of the Plague of the Scourge, and seeing the soldiers who had just died, or even just bitten, and turned into zombies if they were not treated properly, Mograine and the others did not doubt the authenticity of what Duque said. The only good thing was that the Holy Light could effectively deal with the undead, and treat the wounds of the undead. However, Mograine and Abendis were more concerned about the future of Lordaeron. What will happen to His Majesty Menethil? Duque could not bear to tell the truth about Mograine's question. The cruelest thing in the world was killing one's own flesh and blood. Knowing that the first thing Arthas would do after returning was to stab Terenas in the heart, Duque still said slightly tactfully, "It's very dangerous." For a loyal minister like Mograine, this was tantamount to a collapse of faith. The modern people on Earth could not understand the ancient servants, slaves, and so on, who would sacrifice themselves for the family. In fact, when a family served another family for 10 or 20 generations, that kind of unconditional obedience would be branded in the bones, engraved in the deepest part of the soul, and had become a part of the body instinct. Looking at Mograine and Abendis's pale faces, Duque could not bear to add to the pain. However, Duque not adding to the pain did not mean that the cruel truth did not add to the pain. Just when the big tent was silent, there was a sudden commotion outside the big tent. Report. Our men have rescued the captain of Lordaeron's guards, Lord Melov. Mograine suddenly came to his senses and shouted, "Quick! Please come in." Maleev was brought in on a stretcher. He was in very bad shape. His right arm was broken and was tied tightly with a belt as a tourniquet. There were 7 horrifying wounds on his chest and abdomen that were so deep that bones could be seen. The wounds that had been sprinkled with a large amount of hemostatic powder were full of blood and dirt, and there was a lingering dark aura. From the looks of it, he only had 1 breath left. Even the guard captain of the Wong clan was like this. The hearts of the generals in the tent sank to the bottom. Lord Molev! What the hell happened? Molev's eyes turned red as he struggled to shout. Arthas has become a Death Knight. He killed his father, His Majesty Menethil. Rotterdam is finished. In the midst of the intermittent conversation, Molev managed to reconstruct the entire incident. All of a sudden, every general of the Rotterdam kingdom in the tent lost control of their emotions. Some wailed loudly. Some swore revenge. Some were in so much pain that they wished they were dead. However, Alexandros Mograine just sat quietly on the main seat without saying a word. It was as if his soul had been sucked out. And he was as still as a stone statue. Duque and Elugia just stood there, not saying a word. They were not from Rotterdam, but now was the time for them to vent their emotions. After a long time, everyone's emotions started to calm down. What replaced it was a burning desire for revenge. Killing their father. The world could not tolerate it. This was a violation of all morals and conscience. This was a declaration of war against human nature and emotions. Perhaps the fact that Arthas had been tempted by a demon was something to be lamented about. However that, again, like, what? Mograine looked at the generals of the Blood Cross army who were clenching their fists and trembling as they walked to the military sand table. He almost ordered the entire army to move to Rotterdam City and take revenge on Arthas at all costs. However, they were shocked to see Duque walk up and press down on the back of Mograine's hand. "What are you doing?" Duque said in a low voice. "I'm stopping you from taking tens of thousands of elites to do stupid things." "What a joke. I didn't come back after so much trouble just to watch you die and watch you idiots send your elites to Arthas. Rotterdam is done for. Since the royal bloodline of Rotterdam has been severed, from today onwards, the Blood Cross will no longer listen to the alliance. We will complete our revenge in our own way." Mograine said resolutely. "Duque, don't stop us. At least we'll still be friends." Abendis immediately echoed. Duque almost fainted. He knew that these two were brave men, and that they were not so stubborn. They would not have been tricked into forming the craziest organization to fight against the Scourge army, but Duque was speechless at their foolishness. Just thinking about it made him feel sad. After the 3 wars in history, almost all of the 5 Silver Saints had fallen. Only Tyrion Fordring, nicknamed Empress Dowager, was left, seeing Mograine grab the badge of the Alliance on his armor, as if he wanted to officially announce his departure from the Alliance. Duque felt a headache coming on. Damn it, he could definitely mobilize the army from Stormwind. But the northern and southern continents were so far apart, and the mobilization for war had not begun yet. By the time the troops arrived, it would be at least half a month. By the time all the soldiers and equipment arrived, it would be too late. If the Blood Cross, the most capable and largest army in the entire Rotterdam, went to seek death, the situation in the northern continent would be beyond redemption. In this oppressive atmosphere that almost froze the air, a flash of inspiration suddenly flashed through Duke's mind. Duque suddenly turned around and looked at Elugia beside him. Vanessa's team. Elugia suddenly came to a realization as well. They're in the East Elven Forest right now. Originally, Duque had wanted to protect this secret until the end of time, so that the pure and beautiful woman could live a carefree life. But things did not go as he wished. Sorry, Duque took a deep breath and threw out a shocking bomb. Wait. Mograine, Abendis, you swore to protect the royal family of Menethil, right? Yes. Of course, that doesn't include that filthy undying monster who killed his own father. Mograine's eyes were bloodshot. Alright then. What I wanted to say is that the bloodline of the Menethil royal family has not been severed. Chapter 723. Duque, don't talk nonsense. Mograine, who was born into a noble family, instinctively thought of things in a bad direction. The nobles were very particular about bloodlines and bloodlines. Unless it was absolutely necessary, they would not be recognized by the nobles. The earthy bloodline had been around for more than 2,800 years, and the nobles were more or less related to each other by blood. Even though the distance was negligible most of the time, they were still relatives. So when a distant relative came to inherit the throne, the only thing the nobles could think of was that the king of another country was about to peacefully usurp the throne. If King Tyrinas had just passed away, and Duque found a random person to come over and claim the throne, that would be the greatest insult to Mograine and the other loyal subjects. Duque did not want to say it, but if he did not play this card, he would not be able to stop the decline of the alliance. Why was the alliance often forced to ally with the Horde to fight against the Burning Legion? Firstly, the Burning Legion was too strong, and they had to find allies. Even if they knew that the Horde was not that reliable in many ways, it was still 10,000 times better than the alliance in despair and fighting alone. Secondly, it was also because the alliance was much weaker than it was in the beginning. Not only had a few kingdoms been destroyed, but the most important thing was that the population had been greatly reduced. If the alliance could deal with the Burning Legion alone, there would be nothing for the Horde to do. Duque held his forehead, then sighed deeply and added, "It was Princess Kalia. The day of triumph 13 years ago was a glorious day for the alliance, because on that day, the Alliance and the 4 dragon aspects worked together to kill the evil dragon Deathwing, which had been the scourge of Azeroth for 10,000 years. It was also a sad day for Lordaeron, because on that day, the beautiful and holy Princess Kaliao of Lordaeron, who was like an angel in everyone's heart, had passed away. Countless people of Lordaeron were saddened by this. Suddenly, they heard that Princess Kaliao was still alive. This time, not only Mograine and the other generals, even the heavily injured Molev, cried out in shock. "Impossible!" the 2 generals shouted. "I saw it with my own eyes." Molev also struggled and shouted. Then, just a second later, the 3 of them shouted at the same time. "It was you, Duque?" Coincidentally, the person who was here right now was one of the witnesses who had participated in the meeting in the throne room on the day of triumph. "I clearly remember that when I was covering His Majesty's retreat, it was you, Duque, who saved Her Highness." Mograine was the first to speak. "Duque, you bastard. Did you switch?" Abendis continued to imagine. "Impossible. I saw Her Highness Kaliao with my own eyes." Molev screamed. "Don't forget, this guy is the most powerful illusionist in the world." Mograine gritted his teeth. Indeed, Duque has shown his talent in illusion more than once. Molev's words pushed Duque to the top of the waves. "Wait. Then why was Your Highness's dress on that corpse? We can't be mistaken." Hee. "A dress?" Her Highness was wearing the dress that she had used to go on a blind date with the so-called Lord of Presto. How did it end up on a substitute's body? If Princess Kaliao was really still alive like Duque said, then there were only 2 possibilities. One was that Duque was a beast. Back then, Duque had kidnapped the princess and stripped her clothes. Based on Duque's status, identity and character, this possibility was very low. Then it should be the second possibility. Duque was worse than a beast. Duque had long captured the princess' body and mind, and the princess had taken off her white dress and given it to Duque. Duque felt even more wrong than Dou-yi in the face of the suspicious gazes around him. He wanted to see where the Yellow River was, and whether he should jump in and wash himself. "I'm innocent. I'm a righteous person. I really didn't do anything to Kaliao." Duque was speechless. Not only did the others look at him like this, even Alicia, who was beside him, was smirking. Duque was seriously considering whether to dig a hole or teleport away. At this time, Mograine walked in front of Duque and placed his 2 bear-like hands on Duque's shoulders. "If you weren't the Duke Marcus who refused to be a king and was regarded as a hero by the Alliance and a saint by millions of people, I would definitely pull out my sword and kill you right now." Mograine was right. This was too much of a coincidence. The prince of the largest kingdom in the Alliance, Lordaeron, had turned into a Death Knight and stabbed his father to death. Over here, Duque had made the only legitimate heir appear. If it was someone else doing this, it would definitely be seen as the biggest political conspiracy since the founding of the 7 kingdoms. However, Duque was full of righteousness. His holy name and achievements were too dazzling. Even Duque himself did not believe in his own moral integrity, but everyone did. Mograine changed the topic naturally. "I believe that no one in Lordaeron will care about your motives and goals for harboring the princess. As long as you show us proof that the princess is still alive, you will be the greatest benefactor of the Lordaeron people." It was not just Mograine. Everyone else nodded in unison. Princess Kaliao was still alive. This was too important. The bloodline of the Menethil royal family, which had ruled this land for 2,800 years, had not been severed. This was definitely the greatest comfort in the hearts of the Lordaeron officials. Princess Kaliao would become a flag that would lead the people of Lordaeron, who had almost stepped into the endless abyss, to stand up again. At this time, Duque turned his head and nodded at Alicia, who was beside him. Alicia immediately began to cast a spell. Do not underestimate Alicia. In the 10 years that Duque was not around, Alicia had already displayed the boss-level talent that she should have in history, and advanced to a Radiant Moon Mage. Opening a teleportation portal, or something was not a problem. Watching Alicia's graceful figure disappear into the teleportation portal, Duque did not move. Before seeing Kaliao, he was a hostage. Although Mograine was familiar with him, he would not be careless in such an important matter. The generals of Lordaeron were not disappointed. In just a short 3 minutes, a beautiful and noble white-robed priest stepped through the teleportation portal and appeared in front of them. Your Highness Kalia. For a moment, Mograine, Abendis, and Molev could not control their emotions at all. In an instant, they let tears flow down their faces. Her face had changed slightly, but she still had the familiar temperament. The graceful woman in front of them seemed to have walked out of a dust-covered memory. Kalia had matured and become capable. The holy aura around her was many times denser. However, after 13 long years, the generals who had seen Princess Kalia back then still recognized her at a glance. Chapter 724. The generals of Lordaeron were extremely excited. Clattering sounds of armor colliding could be heard. They all knelt on one knee and placed their right hands on their left breastplates. With Grand Duke Alexandros Mograine as the leader, they shouted in unison, "Your Majesty, Queen Kalia Menethil." Kalia was extremely shocked. Too many major events had occurred today, and it had long since caused her to be extremely shocked and thrown into disorder. Originally, she and her adventurer team had returned to Marcus City. It used to be the East Valley Sawmill, but was now upgraded to become the main city of Duke Marcus territory. Suddenly, Miss Alicia, who had been taking care of her for the past 10 years, and letting her live a happy and exciting life of adventure, returned. She suddenly told her about the change in Lordaeron. Even though she had not seen her father for many years, she still missed him immensely. Furthermore, the one who killed him was her favorite brother Arthas, who had now become a Death Knight. This bolt from the blue almost caused Kalia to have a mental breakdown. Losing 2 loved ones in a day was bad enough, but it was her brother who killed her father? Not fainting on the spot was already the result of years of adventuring. The only good news was that Duque, whom she trusted the most, had finally returned from the void. Duque is back? He's looking for me? Yes. Duque needs you. Now. Go now. Lordaeron needs you to take charge. Kalia only heard half of Alicia's words, and vaguely did not notice the rest of the content. She only heard the words, "Duque needs you." It was this sentence that made her temporarily forget her grief and stop thinking. She followed Alicia through the portal like a moth flying into a flame. When she arrived, she saw the familiar faces of Mograine, Abendis, Molev, and the others. When she heard a large group of generals call her, "Your Majesty," at the same time, she realized that things had gotten out of hand. Queen? Me? Kalia was still a little confused. She pointed at her face with a trembling index finger. Yes, the traitor Arthas is evil and fallen. No one in the Rotterdam kingdom would be willing to serve this patricide and rebel as their king. For the future of Rotterdam, Your Majesty Kalia, please inherit the throne now and lead us to fight the evil forces to the death. Mograine's words were sonorous and forceful. Kalia began to digest these words, but she still could not accept the fact that she, who had been a free spirit just a moment ago, was suddenly going back to be a queen. At this moment, a scene that almost made Mograine and the others faint happened. When Kalia was out of her wits, she actually threw herself into Duque's arms. Duque, yes. Duque, Duque, Duque. After a few calls, Duque could only smile bitterly and caress Kalia's beautiful blonde hair. I'm here, I'm back. Duque, they want me to be their queen. What should I do? Kalia was no longer shouting, but directly screaming. Mograine and Abendis were not just dizzy, they were about to vomit blood. It wasn't easy for these loyal subjects to find someone to be loyal to. Now Princess Kalia even had to ask Duke about something as obvious as whether or not she wanted to be queen. What kind of magic potion did Duque give Kalia? Or was she brainwashed? Or had their queen already been tamed by Duque? On the other side, Duque was embarrassed too. In all honesty, I really didn't do anything to Kalia. Duque was embarrassed. He comforted Kalia while saying, Please, you're already an adult. After 13 years of training, aren't you already able to take charge of things on your own? Speaking of which, I haven't seen you for 10 years. I don't understand you at all. Even if you want me to give you an idea, I don't know how to help you. No. Kalia suddenly looked up with a resolute expression. If it weren't for you, Father would definitely treat me as the shame of Rotterdam and imprison me deep in the palace. 13 years later, even if I don't die, I'll be a depressed and miserable woman. I won't live such a happy and free life. Duque was speechless. Mograine and the other onlookers were speechless. Princess Kalia's words made so much sense that everyone was speechless. Kalia took a deep breath. Duque, you're the one who gave me freedom and happiness. You're the one who gave my soul new life. If there's anyone in this world who's qualified to make me willingly give up my freedom and step into this political cage that I hate, that person can only be you, Mr. Duke Marcus. If Mograine had only vomited blood at the corner of his mouth just now, he would have vomited 3 liters of blood now. Their princess was unwilling to be crowned, and even if she was crowned, she would only be willing to be Duque's puppet. From a political point of view, this was definitely a huge loss for Rotterdam. However, from a personal point of view, Mograine and the others understood why Princess Kalia was like this. How could 10 years of freedom and 10 years of house arrest compare? Duque, I beg you. Mograine gave in, his eyes pleading. Duque, we're begging you too, Abendis said. If Princess Kalia refused to be crowned, then they, the officials, would lose their loyalty. Even if they forced Kalia to be crowned, how could the Rotterdam have any unity? Even if they knew that Duque had a huge influence on Kalia, Mograine and the other generals of Rotterdam could only pinch their noses and accept it. Duque was embarrassed. His scalp was numb. However, this situation did not allow for Duque to delay any longer. He could only say softly, Kalia, this is not for me, nor is it just for the millions of people of Rotterdam. This concerns the future of all humans. If Rotterdam collapses, the evil undead creatures will sweep through the entire continent. Humans, dwarves, gnomes, and elves may all go extinct. Kalia pursed her lips. After a long time she replied, All right, for the people, I will be the queen. Almost as soon as she finished speaking, the entire tent was filled with sighs of relief. Unexpectedly, there was more. But before I take the throne, I still want to know your thoughts. All right. Mograine and the others were about to vomit their souls out. Their gazes were like knives and swords, slashing at Duque's back. These gazes were clearly saying, Kid, you're lucky. You can do whatever you want later, but let Her Highness be crowned first. Duque's body stiffened. His scalp was numb, and his back was sweating. In the end, Duque said, Yes. I want you to be crowned. Chapter 725. Kalia finally nodded, as light as a feather, but to the people of Rotterdam, it was extremely heavy. The people of Rotterdam were overjoyed. Long live Her Majesty the Queen. Next, it was Mograine and the other officials who welcomed Kalia to the main seat. There was a small interlude here. Under Kalia's amazing, enhanced healing skill, Molev's injuries actually stopped worsening. Perhaps the captain of the royal guards of the Rotterdam kingdom was destined to be a cripple for the rest of his life, but at least he managed to keep his life. And his testimony would definitely further confirm Kalia's identity. Duque stood at the outermost area and secretly sighed. For Kalia, it was indeed not good for her to give up her freedom. However, perhaps this was the fate of the royal family. After all, Kalia's life was completely different. The original Kalia, after not being able to marry, was placed under house arrest for more than 10 years, until Arthas killed her father. One could imagine that even if the kind-hearted Kalia was not filled with hatred, she no longer had a good impression of the Rotterdam kingdom. That was why she had been living in seclusion after escaping from Rotterdam, allowing the remaining forces of the Rotterdam kingdom to act on their own. Later, when the Calamity army attacked Azeroth, the middle-aged Kalia once again came out as a commandment priest. Seeing Kalia constantly looking at him even though she was sitting in a high position, Duque felt weird. Kalia, are you telling Mograine that I'm the mastermind behind the queen? At this moment, the detestable Elugia whispered, Duque, I'll see how you deal with this. The people of Rotterdam will definitely force you to marry Kalia. I wonder what His Majesty Dalen will think of you. Dalen. What does this have to do with Dalen? Duque was confused. Elugia said something that scared Duque out of his wits. Duque, don't you know? You're still Jaina Proudmoore's fiancé. Ah! Duque was scared out of his wits. He almost peed his pants on the spot. Almost subconsciously, he stretched out his hands and grasped Alicia's smooth and tender arms. Alicia, you can't say things like that. Didn't my so-called engagement with Jaina end when Jaina turns 20? Alicia smiled like a flower, her smug expression full of slyness. For a moment, Duque almost thought that he was facing a fox. That's how it was. But women are very fickle creatures. 10 years after the alliance officially declared you dead, King Garen Trollbane wished to marry Jaina. Ah. Yes, not long after you disappeared, King Salas was assassinated by the Stonefist Ogre, and King Garen succeeded to the throne. Duque's eyes sharpened. Damn, it's actually Garen? It was true that Garen Trollbane was a legitimate prince. However, compared to his father, the great hero Salas, he was nothing. Compared to Danath Trollbane, who was a militia captain but was actually Salas's nephew, Garen was the scum of the scum. Others might not know, but how could he hide it from a transmigrator like Duque? Many of the strong in Azeroth became stronger and more monstrous as they got older. Due to the war, the average lifespan had dropped to 20 years. A strong human like Salas could live to 60 or 70 years old, and still be able to tear an ogre apart with his bare hands. Moreover, Trollbane's name originally meant Troll Slaughterer. If it wasn't for Garen, that bastard, killing his father, how could Salas have died so quickly? Oh, looks like you still have some feelings for your fiancé. Alicia teased. Duque's eyelids twitched and he explained. It has nothing to do with Jaina. I just don't like that bastard Garen. I don't like him either. He has caused chaos in Torrential Castle, and even the entire Earthy Highlands. Now the once famous Highland Knights have been abolished. Sigh. To actually kill a powerful person like Salas, this was a disaster for the Alliance. At this time, Alicia changed the topic. Anyway, Jaina refused to remarry. It just so happened that His Majesty Dalen did not want to marry Lord Darren. In the end, the clever Princess Jaina used you as a cover, and declared that she would not marry anyone but you. She was born a member of the Marcus family, and when she dies, she will be a ghost of the Marcus family. Alicia continued to laugh, of course, because at that time, Stormwind had a good relationship with Kurtiras. The regent, Lord Lothar, and His Majesty Dalen were happy to see this, so it was decided. Dooku almost spat out a mouthful of blood. If it was accompanied by a funeral march, it could even turn into a musical fountain. Even a million alpacas running through his heart would not have been so painful. If someone said that Jaina loved him deeply, Duque would be the first to not believe it. During the 2 years he was training in Karazhan, Duque had already made it clear. She could learn from him, but marriage was out of the question. When Jaina was 20 years old, she would get lost. Marrying a cat or a dog had nothing to do with him. Jaina was not the kind of woman who would be happy to take care of her husband and children. Both sides had already discussed it. Why did this happen now? Duque wanted to kill someone. F***ck. If I'm marrying Jaina, I might as well marry Kalia. Duque was a little mad and did not choose his words. The speaker did not mean it, but the listener did. On the other side, Kalia, who was sitting at the head of the table, pricked up her ears. Mograine and the other old generals also turned their heads at the same time. Kalia blushed on the spot, her right index finger seemingly unconsciously playing with the ends of her long hair that hung down from her temples. Of course, the old and shrewd generals of Lordaeron would not be stupid enough to question Duque on the spot. But the seed had already been planted in their hearts. Duque was speechless. Duque waved his hand and pushed all these things aside. All right. Don't waste time. I've given you the reason and righteousness to fight. Now, in the face of this earth-shattering crisis that will engulf the entire Lordaeron continent, is there anyone else who wants to leave the Alliance? No. Unless Her Majesty announces that we are leaving the Alliance, we are still soldiers of the Alliance. Mograine quickly changed his words. Of course, Kalia was a hardcore supporter of Duque. We'll talk about the official ascension ceremony later. Now, in the name of the Queen of Lordaeron, I order you to unconditionally obey the commands of Commander Duke Marcus. Yes, Your Majesty. Mograine and the others kowtowed deeply. Then Mograine turned to Duque and said, His Excellency Anduin Lothar has left the Alliance command for many years. Originally, I should have been the supreme commander of the Alliance, but now Sir Marcus, you are more suitable than me. All right. Leave it to me. In the face of the Calamity Army's full-scale attack, it would be courting death to give orders. Duque took over the command without hesitation. Just then, he suddenly received a new report. The Calamity Army was attacking the Dalajan. Chapter 726. What? Duque was shocked. What's going on? Why did they attack the Dalajan directly? In history, Arthas had led his army from the west to the east. He had first defeated Cuel Salis, then returned to the Magic Kingdom and overturned the Dalajan. Even Gilnis was beaten to the point that he could not take care of himself, and was forced to release the werewolves. If it wasn't for the fact that Archimonde, one of the two commanders of the Burning Legion, had more important work to do, and that Arthas was busy heading to the Kalimdor continent, it wouldn't be surprising for the Calamity Army to wipe out the entire Eastern Kingdom. However, the report said that they only found a large number of low-level undead. This news made Duque a little uncertain. Although the Calamity Army had many types of soldiers and powerful monsters, the core of the undead was still the Liches and Death Knights. In reality, the core of the undead was still the commanders, the Liches and the Death Knights. Without a Lich or a high-level Death Knight acting as the mastermind, the zombies would just be a motley crew. Duque frowned. Call the mages in charge of sending messages. I want to start a public, remote meeting at the throne level. A few minutes later, more than 10 mages and their magic mirrors filled the tent. The next moment, from Silvermoon City in the Elven Kingdom of Cuel Salis to Stormwind City in the south, every throne-level communication room rang with the most urgent call. In every communication room, the mages in gorgeous magic robes widened their eyes in horror. They almost suspected that they were hallucinating, and suspected that the magic communication that rarely went wrong was fake news. The next moment, they shouted at the top of their lungs, Guards! What? Duque is back. Lordaeron has fallen? Whether it was the sudden return of Duque, who had been missing for 10 years, or the fall of Lordaeron, they were both major events for the entire alliance, not to mention the two combined. This extremely sensational news was no less than a huge spiritual nuclear explosion. Magni Bronzebeard sprinted from his personal blacksmith's forge back to the throne with his short legs. Anduin Lothar, who had been ignoring politics for many years, almost rushed into William's throne room. Even the kings of the three kingdoms that had long since left the alliance had to stop what they were doing and rush to the magic mirror. This was because the person who was about to make the announcement was the legendary hero of the alliance, Duke Marcus. In the pitch-black magic communication mirror, there seemed to be a small flame burning. In the blink of an eye, it spread from a small flame to the entire mirror that was as tall as two people. Rustle. It was clearly the sound of magical waves, but it felt as if the entire palace was shaking. A familiar yet unfamiliar figure appeared on the mirror. Duque. It really was him. Even though he looked a little more mature, it was only in terms of temperament and not appearance. It was as if the time and the void had frozen his age. From the looks of it, Duque still had the face of a young man who was not even 20 years old. Could it be that Duque wouldn't age? Quite a few kings secretly bared their teeth. In fact, the kings had indeed guessed correctly. Duque had received a gift from Alexstrasza, the giver of life. His age had been eternally fixed at 18 years old. Duke went straight to the point. I'm back. I'm back at a rather bad time. This time, it was no longer an illusory prophecy, but a real crisis that threatened the entire world. The Burning Legion's plot succeeded, and Kil'jaeden made the third great chief of the Horde, Nazul, who was defeated by us last time, a Lich King. Duque had sufficient evidence and some spoilers, especially the exaggerated descriptions of certain situations. It made the kings shudder even though it was not cold. What? You're saying that if we leave Arthas's Scourge army alone, he will break through the Sunwell and summon Archimonde the Defiler, one of the two commanders of the Burning Legion? Xion Grameen frowned deeply. Yes. That's right. Duque said with absolute certainty. He had originally thought that throwing out a rare enemy like Archimonde would be good enough to scare the kings of the countries that had left the alliance. It was obvious that many things had happened in the 10 years that Duque was not around that Duque did not know. The first to speak up was the Elven King Anastrian. The Sunwell is very safe. The High Elves are completely capable of defending their home. This time, we have upgraded our defense system. The defense of the Eversong Forest is impregnable. But Duque wanted to say something else, but was interrupted again. We the High Elves express our regret for the fall of the capital of a kingdom that hoped the elves to cut down trees to build houses for their people. Finally, thank you for your reminder, Lord Marcus. With that, the Elven King actually cut off the magic communication. Before Duque could react, Xion on the other side added, Gilneas is capable of defending his own country. The Greymane Wall is invincible. With that, Xion also left. Then Garen Trollbane glared at Duque with a venomous gaze, and left after throwing down a vicious sentence. The Saladin Wall is not inferior to the Greymane Wall. Duque suddenly realized that he seemed to have finally gotten close to the original history. He finally understood why the Calamity Army could easily sweep through the entire northern continent after Earthes killed his father. Of course, the Calamity Army's snowballing ability was astonishing. On the other hand, because of the reconstruction and territorial disputes after the war, the strongest Lordaeron had long been in conflict with the surrounding countries. Then a group of fellows who thought that they were very good at defending with turrets only realized at the moment of destruction that even if an armed goat was armed to the teeth, it was still just a goat. It would never be a match for a wolf. F***ck, this rotten hand is simply a huge pit. At this moment, the aged face of Antonidas suddenly cut into the magic communication. Duque, hurry and help the Dalajan. Those damned undead monsters are here. They came from the bottom of the lake. After a few words, Antonidas's face disappeared from the magic message. The remaining kings of the alliance all paled. Duque clenched his teeth. There's only one possibility for the magic communication to be interrupted. A stronger element has disturbed the elemental stability of the nearby space. In Duque's mind he could only think of one word, canopy of necromancy. Only the most powerful undead could forcibly change the elements in the entire sky into the dark element that symbolized death. Could it be Arthes himself? The script of fate seemed to have been seriously deviated. At this moment, Duque still did not know that this was actually his fault. If not for his emergency evacuation plan, Lordaeron would have been completely destroyed this time. It was precisely because the Marcus Merchant Guild's ships saved tens of thousands of civilians that Earthes changed his mind and led his army south. Just then another bad news came. A large number of orcs attacked Goldenhold Castle. Chapter 727. Damn it. Most of those orcs are elites that have been eliminated through cruel battles, one of the generals muttered, revealing the truth. Duque rolled his eyes. If you don't want to die, why do you still want to die? You're so stupid that instead of killing them all, you're helping them train their elites. With Terena's intelligence, even if he doesn't die, it'll be a waste of oxygen. Fortunately, he was stabbed to death by his son. Otherwise, Duque wouldn't want to clean up the mess for Lordaeron. I don't care if you destroy the northern continent, I'll just guard my Stormwind. Anyway, I don't have to go guard the World Tree, right? You want me to take the blame for Lordaeron's sins? Do you think it's easy for me to trick some elite troops? Beside him, a large group of Lordaeron generals saw Duque's eyelids twitching. He looked like he was going to lose his temper at any moment. None of them dared to make a sound. The Dalajan city was under attack. Logically speaking, the 80,000 elites from the Scarlet Cross should be able to help the Dalajan defend against the Scourge. What they were afraid of was that the orcs would arrive as soon as the humans sent reinforcements. Duque took the note filled with information about the orcs and read it 3 times. Then he laughed coldly. You Lordaeron people can do this too. Only send 3,000 people to guard 10,000 orcs? Then all the orcs in the Colosseum, with Breyer as the center, ran out, but didn't report it because of Earthes' victorious return? Even the Warsong clan that hasn't been wiped out is here? Duke's cold laughter was like a whip lashing on the faces of every Lordaeran general. It was an invisible pain that made their faces burn. Most of the generals lowered their heads. This was Tarina's fault. As long as they still wore the Lordaeran epaulette, they would have to bear it. At this time, Reynolds' weak voice sounded. There are only 10,000 orcs in Goldenhold Castle. His father, Alessandro, was furious. Bastard, you have no right to speak here. Duque raised his hand and stopped old Mograine. Kid, although I'm only half a generation older than you, when it comes to military matters, you don't have the right to speak. Duque immediately saw the unconvinced expression on Reynolds' face. Duque laughed as well. 10,000 beastmen? In fact, it was definitely more than that. The extra ones were secretly sold to the arena by the guards. That's why there are at least 15,000 orcs who hate humans. As soon as Duque finished speaking, the faces of all the generals of the Rotterdam kingdom turned sullen. Corruption. Filthy. And he acted recklessly. It was a great taboo for military strategists to advance without knowing the strength of the opponent. Normally speaking, even the most well-trained recruits would be easily swapped for 3 orcs. The orcs' title of warrior race was not just for show. If the number of orcs attacking Goldenhold was 30,000, then even Mograine's 80,000 elites wouldn't be enough. At this time, Duque raised a second finger. Secondly, the number of orcs in Goldhold right now isn't 30 or 50,000. It's at least 100,000. This news was like a bolt out of the blue. Mograine and the others were all dumbfounded. 100,000? Where did 100,000 come from? How many orc laborers do they have? Abendis asked tentatively. 0. Duque sighed. And they're not ordinary second-tier tribes. They're definitely the elite warriors of first-tier clans. What? Old Mograine and the others paled in shock. As people who had experienced the second battle of the Dark Portal, and had been fighting the remnants of the Horde for many years, they knew the difference in combat power between Horde elites and second-tier clans. Abendis asked in shock. Where did the 100,000 elites come from? Duque spread out the intelligence and pointed at the battle flags drawn by the scouts. They recognized all the other flags. The only one that stood out was the Warsong clan's flag. And Duque was pointing at another flag that they were extremely unfamiliar with. This is the Frostwolf clan. It used to be the 4th clan in the Horde after the Blackstone, Warsong, and Bloodring clans. Other than having fewer people, their combat power is definitely top-notch. Frostwolf. Everyone was extremely unfamiliar with this name. Duque said slowly. It's normal that you don't know. Because in the first year of the Dark Portal, this clan was exiled by the first Great Chief Blackhand, and the Warlock King Ghoul, Dan when they first arrived in Azeroth due to political disagreements. They secretly crossed the entire southern continent, crossed the sea from the Gulf of Paladin, passed through Hillsbrad, and lived in seclusion in the depths of the Alterac Mountains. How many elite orc soldiers does the Frostwolf clan have? Mograine asked. No less than 50,000. As for how many there were, Duque did not know either. Since the Frostwolf clan had not been besieged in the past 15 years, it was expected that Thrall, who had returned to his ancestry, would receive the support of the Frostwolf clan. 50,000 was already a conservative number. Every general who had experienced the second battle of the Dark Portal frowned deeply. Not to mention saving the Dalajan, they would not even be able to protect themselves. The evil Undying and the orcs, who were filled with hatred towards humans, were enough to massacre the entire continent. Sitting at the head of the table, Queen Kalia looked left and right. Even if she knew nothing about military affairs, she knew that things were not good. Unknowingly, everyone's gazes were cast on Duque. They were looking at this mysterious commander who had annihilated millions of orcs more than a decade ago with less than a third of the enemy's forces. If it was someone else sitting in this position, it would certainly be a hopeless situation. But he was different. He was Duke Marcus, a living legend recognized by the 3 races of the Alliance. Since everyone regards me as their commander, I will naturally lead everyone to a path of survival. Duque's youthful face was filled with confidence. The powerful aura of someone who could guide the world and play with the enemy in the palm of his hand made the hearts of the three women palpitate. Kalia, Elucia, sorry. They all revealed looks of worship. At this very moment, Goldhold Castle. No, don't kill me, no. The last human guard was torn apart. The orcs, who had been tortured for who knew how many years, tore off the guard's hands, feet, and head like a doll, turning them into pieces of meat. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. The orc, whose face was covered in blood, laughed maniacally. Long live Thrall. Long live Orgrim. Long live Grom Hellscream. The orcs cheered to their heart's content, raising the crude weapons in their hands high to show off their strong muscles. Thrall, holding a blood-stained battle-axe, was equally excited. Even he had suffered for far, far too long. The whipping of the humans seemed to still be burning in his back. Chapter 728. At this time Orgrim, who was in his prime, came over with his famous Hammer of Destruction. Thrall, let's go if you're done celebrating. So soon? Thrall was a little surprised to see Orgrim looking a little anxious. On the other side, Grom, who was carrying Bloodhowl, also came over. Thrall, you're still too young. You haven't seen the Alliance's terrifying battle potential, or those strange weapons of destruction. I suggest you listen to Orgrim when it comes to the big picture. Thrall was a leader-type beastman that only appeared once in 1,000 years. He had unimaginable wisdom and character. That's right, character determined fate. Experience also shaped character. Different from the original history, Thrall had been found by Orgrim at a young age through the prophecy of the shaman prophet. He had grown up in a different environment and been secretly protected. Even though he was still a gladiator, he didn't receive the abuse that he should have received. At the same time, Blackmore's human lover no longer sympathized with him and gave him warmth. What replaced it was Orgrim's earnest teachings from a young age. Thrall was now raised according to the standard chieftain template. He had a humble personality and listened to Orgrim, who was both his teacher and his father. Thrall lowered his head slightly. Indeed, in the arena, I've heard many legends about the strength of the humans and dwarves. I've never seen them before. Orgrim and Grom, you two have more experience in this than I do. I'll listen to you. At this time, a beastman scout came over. What? The Scarlet Cross is near us. The three leaders were shocked. The Scarlet Cross, which they had labeled as their #1 target, had actually been stationed in the northwest, less than 30 kilometers away from here, without their knowledge. This was a huge threat. Grom raised his ferocious bloodhowl. How about it? Do you want to fight? Yes. Thrall and Orgrim said in unison. Then let's go. Regardless of whether the humans were ambushing them or not, this battle had to be fought. Duque didn't know that in these 10 years, the Lordaeron people had suppressed the horde very well. They continued to build bunkers and walls to reduce the living space of the beastmen. Thrall and Orgrim had long thought of abandoning the Lordaeron continent and seizing a ship to cross the Kalimdor continent. This time, Sal had gathered the elites of the Warsong and Frostwolf clans. In addition to the 20,000 people he had rescued, as well as the 30,000 old, sick and disabled, there were a total of 150,000 beastmen. The migration of such a large number of beastmen could not be hidden from anyone. Rather than praying that the Scarlet Cross army was blind and could not see the existence of this orc army, it was better to get rid of this terrifying tale. After so many years of battle, these beastmen had become extremely elite. From the military system to the command system, Orgrim had modified them based on human methods. 10 minutes after the order was given, an army of more than 80,000 people was mobilized. Loktar. The loud and clear charge that had been absent from the Rotterdam kingdom for many years sounded again. Sar, Grom, Orgrim, and the even more muscular Rexer were leading an army of 80,000 beastmen towards the encampment of the Blood Cross. Ha! I don't know why, but I suddenly remembered that terrible long-distance raid 13 years ago. Orgrim suddenly laughed. Which time? The time when we were near the Longsong forest? Sar remembered every battle that Orgrim had mentioned. Yes. We ran madly for 3 hours, but we were completely empty-handed. Was it that Duke Marcus who led the army? Yes. If possible, I really don't want to meet that guy again. Luckily, the Scarlet Cross army has nothing to do with that guy. Orgrim sighed. He's been dead for more than 10 years, Grom muttered unhappily. He's gone missing. Orgrim emphasized. Even though I don't want to meet him, as long as I don't see his head, I won't be stupid enough to think that my greatest enemy is dead. Sar, do you understand? Never underestimate your enemy until you are sure that he is dead. Understood. Sar nodded. Grom shrugged. You guys are just too careful. The beastmen's speed was very fast. As long as they were the elites of the first-line clans with strong bodies, it would not be a problem for them to run for 50 kilometers at full speed. 30 kilometers would only take about 2 hours. However, when they arrived, the strange scene in front of them left them scratching their heads. The camp was empty. From the looks of it, they had left for about 2 hours, heading towards the mountains in the north. What was even stranger was that there were obvious signs of a battle in the camp. Broken antlers, claw marks on the camp gate. Years of experience fighting in forests and mountains allowed Grom to immediately make a judgment. There was a battle here. It wasn't big, but it must have been a battle. With who? Sar immediately asked. Grom gave a look, and a Warsong Beastman warrior immediately ran over and dug up the huge pile of soil that was obviously newly filled in. The corpses were all burned, so I can't tell. But it looks like it was a human civilian. Human? Civilian? Did the Scarlet Cross suppress a peasant uprising? Sar lacked experience, but Orgrim wasn't. The former chief frowned. Why are there traces of holy light on these corpses? Just as Orgrim was confused, cheers suddenly erupted in the camp. What's wrong? Weapons. So many weapons. High-grade stuff. A Chiliarch came back to report. Let's go take a look. It was a batch of well-made two-handed hammers and axes that were clearly made by the dwarves. They were made for humans. The handles, heads, and blades of the hammers were made of steel. The beastmen loved these weapons so much that they couldn't put them down. Especially the older beastmen who had experienced the battle at the Dark Portal. They were lecturing the new generation of beastmen on how good these dwarven goods were. What's going on? Orgrim's brows were knitted together. They left in a hurry. These weapons are too heavy. They can't be transported. Grom didn't seem to mind. Perfect for us. You have to know that killing 10 human warriors might not even be enough to get you a good weapon. The standard weapons of the human soldiers are too light. I'm not used to them. Grom was speaking the truth. Human battle formations emphasized teamwork. Other than the nimble spears, weapons that were too long or too heavy would be a hindrance to their teammates. Other than skilled knights or holy knights, very few humans would use heavy weapons on the battlefield. Chapter 729. The two-handed weapons of the humans were only one-handed weapons in the hands of the beastmen, but they were still 100 times better than the wooden mallets and stone axes that most beastmen used. Is it poisoned? Orgrim asked worriedly. The Chiliarch shook his head. Our people used werewolves to smell it. It's fine. It's just that there seems to be some remnants of human holy light on the weapons. After Orgrim heard this, he was relieved. This should be the reserve of the human silver hand. I just don't know why they were in such a hurry to leave these weapons here. Looking at the 2,000 or so high-quality heavy weapons, Orgrim had an inexplicable doubt in his heart. An army that was likely here to suppress the Beastman uprising had left behind such a large number of weapons. It was practically giving aid to the enemy. Do we not want these weapons? Thrall frowned. Orgrim gritted his teeth. Yes. Why not? If the humans dare to come, we don't mind using their weapons to teach them an unforgettable lesson. Grom said. Then are we going to chase after the Scarlet Cross in the north? Fighting in the mountains is more advantageous for us. Thrall said. Won't they be too far away from our main force? There are still many children and pregnant women there. Thrall did not know that this sentence had directly pushed the Beastman army into danger. This was the asymmetry of information. Beastmen were not suited to be scouts, so the Beastmen's information about Lord Darren was limited to the mountains. In the past, They might have been able to hear some news through the beastman slaves who knew the common language. After the uprising, the people of Lordaeron naturally hunted beastmen without restraint. Many slave owners were afraid of trouble, so they killed all their beastman slaves and gladiators. Although Thrall's army seemed strong, in a sense, he was in trouble now that he had lost his eyes. Orgrim pondered for a moment. If we catch up to the Scarlet Cross, we might be able to deal a heavy blow to them. But the South Sea City is also very strong. I'm also worried that they will send troops. Since they had reached an agreement, the beastmen retreated. The strongest beastmen naturally had the best weapons. What the beastmen were most worried about did not happen. The main force was still waiting near Gorehold Castle. Let's go. If the beastmen wanted to cross the endless sea, there were not many routes they could choose. After all, the coastline of Lordaeron was very steep, and even the beastmen could not go down. The best route was from Gorehold Castle to the northeast. Although they had to pass through Eagle Nest Mountain under the Wildhammer Dwarf's eyes, with the protection of the forest, they might be able to reach an agreement with the jungle trolls again. Unfortunately, the end of this route was a dead end. It was precisely because Orgrim's tribe had used the hinterland's sea-watching cliff to enter and exit the Lordaeron continent. Naturally, the human kings would not ignore this flaw. Under the premise that they could not extend their control to the hinterlands, the kings came up with a good idea: to ask the Nagas and Murlocs under Duke's command to guard the sea on the other side of the cliff. With the precedent, the last elite of the tribe of beastmen, Orgs, the beastman, now tribe, of land, of Fifth Fleet, of Kurtiraz's Fifth Fleet was stationed at the fortress of Tol Barad Island all year round. Even if they broke through the South Shore defense line, it would be suicide. The North Coast and Whispering Coast at the northernmost tip of Lordaeron were not out of the question. The problem was that the beastmen had just revolted there, and it was like poking a hornet's nest. To Thrall and the others, it was a dead end. Little did they know that the Scourge army would wipe them out. As a result, the only way out was to the west of the continent, the South Stream Coast and the North Stream Coast. There was a long coastline between the two coasts. This road was like a wooden bridge. This meant that the Beastmen army would have to pass through South Sea, Dalagen, and Gilneas. But Orgrim's analysis: South Sea had no military force, and Gilneas had built the Greymane Wall to isolate them. Other than the Dalagen, the other two were unlikely to send troops. However, as the Beastmen army carefully passed through the Hillsbrad Hills from east to west and approached the Dalagen, they suddenly realized that the situation was completely beyond their imagination. What? Humans like monsters? Thrall was stunned. Yes. Those human civilians have gone crazy. Their eyes are even redder than when we drank the demon's blood 10 years ago. One of the Kiliarchs grumbled. My men have already torn them in half, but they can still bite us with their mouths. It feels like they are dead, but how can the dead move? Thrall and Orgrim's faces immediately turned pale. Something was wrong. The two quickly rushed to the front line on their war wolves. The situation in front of them shocked them. Once upon a time, humans used the term Green Sea to describe the horde's attack. Now the situation seemed to have completely reversed. The brave beastmen formed a relatively tight line, slashing at the humans who were charging at them without any regard for their lives. No, it was obvious that these were not humans. These terrifying creatures that looked like humans had long lost their lives. Thrall saw with his own eyes a man whose chest had been eaten by an unknown creature waving a pitchfork. His teeth were exposed through the torn skin on his face, and an unknown black liquid was flowing between the gaps of his teeth. He madly rushed up and attempted to kill an orc. Even after being cut in half, the monster still crawled up from below. While the orc warrior was busy dealing with the other two monsters, it viciously bit the orc warrior's exposed calf. No, these are not humans. They are some kind of undead. Ancestors above. No wonder the humans did not come looking for trouble with us. They are in huge trouble themselves. Orgrim cried out in shock. Should we retreat? Thrall asked anxiously. Retreat. Retreat immediately. We do not need to foolishly get involved in this disaster. Orgrim clenched his teeth. Just as the horde was about to retreat, the dark aura of the wind became even more violent. On the shore of Lake Lordimir, east of the Dalajan city, countless undead walked up from the cold bottom of the lake. In the camp of the Calamity Army, accompanied by the cold wind that defied the weather, black flags were raised high and fluttering. As if they sensed something, the giant Arachne and the cursing sect's death acolytes raised their heads at the same time. Not only them, but the Death Knight generals and liches with dark aura all looked southeast at the same time. In their eyes, which were pulsing with soul flames, was a holy pillar of light that almost shot up to the sky. Deep in their eye sockets, a trace of doubt appeared. Holy Knights? So many. Chapter 730. The undead were most sensitive to the aura of the living. The holy aura, which was the most effective against the undead, could easily and severely stimulate the remaining senses of the undead. More than 2,000 weapons blessed by the holy light, even if it was only for a short period of time, were no different from lighthouses in the dark. It didn't matter where these paladins came from, but all the commanders of the Calamity Army felt that they were being seriously provoked. Human vision was received by the eyes from the outside world, and then transmitted to the brain through the nerves to produce vision. For most of the middle and low-level undead, because their blood had stopped flowing, they had long lost sight. In their senses, they could only see whether the soul fire of the living was strong or not, as well as the vague outline of the living's body. As for what kind of creature the living were, it was not within the scope of their poor intelligence. Be it the holy light or the dark force, they were actually a kind of soul power. Contrary to the dark aura of corruption, it was the holy soul that cultivated the self and cultivated the body. The orcs naturally didn't have paladins, but the noble will of sacrificing themselves for the sake of the race was the same. Just like the day when Anduin and Orgrim dueled and broke Quel'Zarim, it was because the sword judged that Orgrim was a noble person. At this moment, these strong-willed orcs were holding hammers that were blessed with the power of holy light. In the eyes of the undead, they were undoubtedly a large number of paladins. The paladins must die. The undead at the front line almost instinctively rushed to the center of the orcs. A lich floating in the air slowly came to the shore. The cold aura around him formed a thick layer of white frost on the ground. A little purplish-blue soul fire danced in his pitch-black eye sockets. Beside him was a sea of zombies. From time to time, Death Knights held up a black flag and rode their undead war horses past. From Lake Lordimir, the tide spread endlessly. It was the undead army that covered the entire land from the shore. The gloomy sky was filled with fluttering snowflakes. The distant view of the battlefield was reflected in the depths of the emotionless, cold eyes. He raised his withered chin and stretched out a pale and slender finger. He held the skeleton staff in his hand and pointed it in the direction of the holy light. There was no need for a password. All the living were the enemies of the Calamity Army. On both sides, the Death Knights and low-level undead acolytes pressed their bony palms on their chests. The purplish-blue soul fire that was stimulated by the power of the devil burned even more fiercely. Stimulated by the power of the devil, the purplish-blue soul fire burned even more fiercely. Like falling dominoes, the commanders of the Scourge troop lowered their heads one after another. When they raised their heads again, their eyes were filled with pale white flames. The roar from the soul level drove away the low undead with insufficient wisdom below. In the name of the Burning Legion, Kilkjeeden. Along with the roar of the souls, the huge black tide of death that had accumulated on the shores of Lordermill Lake began to pour towards the orc army that was advancing towards the south. On the north bank of Dalaran, the frontline commander, Arthas, who stood at the highest point of the Scourge army with Frostmourne in hand, looked up and said, "What the hell is Ras Frostwhisper doing? I want him to attack the Dalajan from the east." Lyss Frostwhisper. Due to a slight twist in history, Sir Lyss, who had already died and sunk to the bottom of Caer Darrow Lake, was fished out of the lake by Kel'Thuzad, who was searching for dark allies. In one fell swoop, he became Kel'Thuzad's most outstanding student, and one of the core members of the cursing sect. Naturally, it would be difficult for Earthies alone to control an army of undead that numbered in tens of thousands. When he fell, Kel-Thuzad, who was killed by him last year, was naturally in the same camp as him, and Kel-Thuzad's men were promoted to frontline commanders. Ras Frostwhisper wasn't bad, but that was the extent of it. Ras Frostwhisper was equivalent to a Radiant Moon mage, but when faced with the Dalajan mages, Earthies clearly felt that Ras Frostwhisper was useless. This self-proclaimed king of Lordaeron's Death Knight began to miss Kel-Thuzad, an assistant with sufficient intelligence and powerful magic. Earthies looked at Dark Dean Jadine beside him, then looked at the dozens of mage towers outside the Dalajan city that were constantly flashing with magical light. He frowned and said, "Since Ras Frostwhisper thinks that the beastmen over there are a threat, let him be. How long will it take before the Dalajan's magical energy is exhausted?" Jadine estimated and said, 3 days and at least 300,000 cannon fodder will be used. Earthies sneered in contempt and said, "Cannon fodder? There are human settlements everywhere in the Hillsbrad Hills. There's as much cannon fodder as you want. If you don't have them, go find them." Those beastmen seem to be good cannon fodder. With their strong bones, even if they become skeleton soldiers, they will be stronger than ordinary skeleton soldiers. Understood. Dean Jadine bowed deeply and retreated. A few minutes later, more undead rushed towards the beastmen. Now, not only had the beastmen's front army fallen, even the middle army was beginning to be surrounded. Unless Sar and Orgrim were willing to abandon the women and children, they could only fight to the death. Oh, my ancestors! Where did these bones come from? Sar was very depressed. He had already changed his hammer for the 3rd time. Not only did he lack a suitable weapon, but he had also not practiced the path of the shaman at this point in time. He was just a super soldier. Orgrim was also in a difficult situation. He had no choice but to wave the hammer of destruction and chase the undead knights that were running all over the mountains on their skeletal warhorses. Other than him and a few chieftains, the ordinary beastmen had no way to resist the undead knights. Perhaps the holy light in their hands would be more effective, but they were not real paladins. Before the holy light could hit the undead knights, they first had to withstand the dark magic of the undead knights. The only consolation was that these undead knights were not too strong. After all, the first batch of undead knights that Gul'dan created were all sorcerers, and they had one set of dark magic after another. Most of these undead knights were pure knights, and they were more inclined towards physical attacks. In the southern foothills of the Alterac Mountains to the east of the Dalajan city, a few sneaky figures appeared. Mograine could not help but sigh when he saw the fierce battle below through his binoculars. "Duque, you still have a way." Chapter 731. One could imagine what would happen if the Scarlet Cross rushed in to rescue the Dalajan. That's right, the Beastman army would end up like the Scarlet Cross. Duque smiled mysteriously. If we went straight to the Dalajan, we would have to face nearly 1,000,000 Scourge soldiers and 100,000 Beastmen. But now, with the Beastmen helping us take the lead, we can relax a lot. More than 2,000 hammers blessed with King's Blessing and Power's Blessing in exchange for 100,000 elite beastmen, as our reinforcements. Not a bad deal, is it? Duque had a calm expression. Duke was able to easily make 2 powerful enemies kill each other. His ability to strategize was something that even Mograine, the former commander of the Alliance, had to admit that he couldn't compare to, let alone the other generals. Duque didn't notice a beautiful female general standing behind Abendis. She looked somewhat similar to Abendis, and she was looking at him with some kind of indescribable fanaticism. Abendis asked, "When do we enter?" Duque rested his chin on his hand. "Well, we attack when Arthas goes to cause trouble for Orgrim. Remember, we can't turn back. We have to kill our way through the enemy lines and the center of the Dalajan army. After joining up with the Dalajan mages, we can counterattack Arthas. Arthas has the magic tool Frostmourne. To be honest, Arthas should be a demigod now. Our chances of winning are not high." Abendis asked tentatively, "What about the Dragon Sleep Temple?" I've asked. "The Burning Legion has sent many powerful demons to attack the spatial barrier of Azeroth. Maligos and Nozdormu can't come, and the Emerald Dream has been unstable recently. Isra can't leave either. In addition, Alexstrasza was still trapped in the void of Karazhan. The current Dragon's Sleep Shrine was a classic example of a group of dragons without a leader. In the past, Duque had wondered why the Dragon's Sleep Temple was in Noscent and why the Scourge Army, that group of trash, could dominate all of Noscent and sweep through all life forms. Only by immersing himself in this period of history did Duque truly understand the depth of the Burning Legion's foundation. It was obvious that a large group of Khazar-level demon generals and dreadlords were restraining the giant dragon army from the outside, preventing the giant dragons from dealing with the mortal world's Scourge Army. In the Dragonbone Wasteland, the guardians of the Dragonbone Shrine could only protect themselves. Duque smirked. We're going to challenge demigods soon. Are you afraid? If this demigod's name wasn't Arthas, I would have peed my pants. Abendis seemed to be smiling bitterly. Mograine gritted his teeth. Loyalty. I will not retreat until I die. Duque sighed. If it were him, he would definitely leave after saving them. There were so many mages in the Dalajan. It would be terrible if they all died here. However, war was fought by humans and humans had hearts. Even with Kalia's help, Mograine and Abendis would not be satisfied if they did not try to avenge Tyreenas, and just left like that. At the moment when Wuther could not be contacted, Duke did not have a single person who was powerful enough to break the charts. Challenging Arthas with just Mograine, Abendis, and Antonidas would be courting death. If Orgrim, Lord Howlgrom, and Rexer were included, it would be a different story. In the original history, Grom had a glorious record of killing a demon lord. First, they forced the Beastmen to fight Arthas. Then, Duque would be able to bring an insufficient number of people and act as real reinforcements in an unkind way. Of course, Duque did not want Mograine and Abendis to die here. We don't know how powerful the peerless Frostmourne is. If things go south, we will quickly retreat in the opposite direction of the Beastmen's retreat. In principle, our goal is to return to the coast of the South Sea City. As long as we reach the South Sea defense line, we will be safe with the help of the cannons. Mograine and Abendis nodded at the same time. Then they looked at Prince Arthas in the north of the Dalajan, gritted their teeth and left. No one knew how many undead the Scourge Army had created. In the depths of Lake Lordamir, undead kept coming out of the lake. Even with the elites of the Scarlet Cross, it was a very risky thing to attack such a terrifying undead army. One mistake and the Scarlet Cross would become the Undead Crusade. None of the Lordaeron soldiers hesitated, because in front of them was the traitor who had killed the king they swore to serve for the rest of their lives, Arthas. The people of Lordaeron went down to prepare. Elucia, you should go back with Kalia. This will be the cruelest war zone from now on. Kalia had long been teleported to Stormwind City. Even though Kalia already had the strength of a regional bishop, her identity as the Queen of Lordaeron had determined that no one would be willing to risk her life at the front lines. After Duque finished speaking, Elucia did not move. Duque, how long are you going to hide it from me? Are you going to face an evil demigod with your terrible magic circuits? Duque was shocked, and then smiled bitterly. Did you see through me? Where's your Magus hand? 10 years ago, you had the power to wipe out half an army by yourself. Don't think I didn't see you when you made your move at Terran Mill. That kind of proper spellcasting. How is it any different from an ordinary Radiant Moon mage? No, the current you, apart from your superb skills, might not even be able to defeat me. Elucia was right. Duque was not in a good state. Since his return, Duque had been secretly trying to repair his magic circuits. Unfortunately, the ultra-long-distance irregular teleportation not only put a huge burden on the system elf, but also caused Duque's magic circuits to be in a state of constant acceleration and overload because of the many spatial cracks he encountered during the teleportation. His magic circuits were not simply damaged. Many of them were directly burnt and melted. They were no longer orderly, and were almost twisted into a ball. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were crippled. Duque turned his head slightly, and looked at the intense battlefield in the distance. Elucia, I must go. A tragedy was about to happen. If not to make up for the various regrets in his heart, what was the point of him transmigrating to Azeroth? The current Duque was no longer the Duque of 15 years ago who was good as long as he was not a ghoul. Chapter 732. The more she pretended not to care. Duque needed immediate combat power, and Wuxia could provide it. If Wuxia's magic circuit was transplanted to Duque, Duque could at least quickly return to the strength of a peak radiant moon mage. The more Duque cared, the more he cared. Looking at the burning love in Wuxia's pure eyes, Duque suddenly understood why. If just sacrificing a small part of my soul in exchange for my lover's life, it's worth it. Besides, doing this will give me the confidence to stand shoulder to shoulder with Sister Aurelia and Sister Sasha. Her alluring red lips lightly touched Duque's tiger's lips. Wuxia gazed at Duque. Or do you hate having my soul merge with yours? Duque could not imagine what kind of pain it was beyond the physical. It was obvious that it would be more terrifying and painful than having one's hands and feet torn off from a human body. No, this was not a simple feeling. It was a feeling of disappointment. 3 years together. Many things could happen. Thirdly, both parties involved in the transplant had to be willing. Whether it was magic or holy light, they were all strange energies that originated from the soul. The magic circuit was a special magic production and circulation channel that was shaped by one's own soul. As long as the other soul resisted, even if it was subconsciously, then the transplant would inevitably fail. Time did not diminish Wuxia's love for Duque. Instead, it was like a fine wine stored in a cellar, becoming more fragrant the more it was brewed. Secondly, the magic circuit of both parties must be of the same origin. For example, those who played with Phoenix Flame and directly transplanted it into Ice Crown without any transformation would be courting death. 3. But he did not expect that this woman, who was not talented in magic and was destined to be unable to step into the realm of heroes to fight alongside him, would be willing to sacrifice herself for him to this extent. Unknowingly, tears were already flowing down Duque's cheeks. Then, the forest began to echo with Wuxia's unsuppressible moans of pain. How many women would be willing to wait for a lover who had been missing for 10 years, and was probably long dead? In the face of Duque's determined look, Wuxia gently shook her head. Bit by bit, she sucked on those 2 luscious red lips, sucking in the fragrance that came from her lover. Use my magic circuit. Wuxia's smile was so gentle and moving, as if she was saying something that had nothing to do with her. 10 years, the most crucial 10 years for a young girl to become a true lady. With the accumulation of generations, the quality and quantity of magic circuits would be astonishing. Duque had thought that his threat would be effective, and he would see panic on her beautiful face, which was full of mature charm. That way he would be able to get her to give up on this crazy idea. However, he couldn't bear to watch his friend and hero die. Why was it that most magicians were passed down through aristocratic families, and the first generation of magicians were rarely very powerful? It was no longer a simple friendship or emotional bond. Wuxia, you're crazy. Do you know how painful a transplant is? The magic circuit is also a part of your soul. Even if my circuit is burned, it's only that part of the circulation is blocked. But if your circuit is transplanted, it's like forcibly tearing a part of your soul out. Duque shouted agitatedly, grabbing Wuxia's arms hard and shaking the woman who had followed him wholeheartedly for more than 10 years. But Duque shuddered, his face full of horror. He directly pulled Wuxia into his arms, one hand gently holding the soft shoulder of the noble lady, and the fingers of the other hand directly touching the intellectual face. 10 years apart. Then, any more words would be superfluous. What else could Duque say? It seemed a little naughty, but in fact Duque was re-examining Wuxia. He wanted to deeply remember every line on this beautiful face, engrave it in his retina, engrave it in his heart, and brand it in the depths of his soul. Duque kissed her hard. 2. Before he came back, Wuxia did not abandon his fief, and even conscientiously built his fief into the most prosperous area in the southern continent. For this, Duque was already very grateful. Nearly 5 years of planning and hard work, 10 years of wandering in the void. The life on Earth seemed to have become very far away. Only with the help of the system could he easily recall the bits and pieces of Earth. Unknowingly, in Duque's heart, there was a kind of awareness that he was already breathing with Azeroth, sharing the same fate. Duque was disappointed. Alucia had the above 3 points. It sounded very good, didn't it? It was precisely because before he transmigrated, whether it was from the examples of people around him, or the influence of WeChat and Weibo, that Duque had seen too many love affairs that could not stand the test of time. He dared not have the greatest hope. He could hide in Karazhan, where he could live a shameless life with the Windrunner sisters every day. He could decorate the space that belonged to him at will. He could immerse himself in the world of magic like a real mage. And with Alexstras's protection, he did not even have to worry about the cats and dogs of the Burning Legion coming to find him. Use her magic circuit? First, both parties of the transplant had to be alive. Once they died, the activity of the magic circuit would quickly dissipate. Duque, I'm not stopping you from going. My great hero. That soft voice naturally made people think of a young wife staying at home quietly waiting for her husband to return. Gently tilting her head, Alucia emphasized, I'm just stopping you from going to die in this state. What else could Duque say? However, Alucia used her weak body to bear all of this. 1. Looking at Alucia's face that pretended not to care for his peace of mind, feeling the trembling from her delicate body, Duque's heart had long been drowned in tears. However, there were many prerequisites for this. That's right, the magic circuit could actually be transferred and transplanted. What? 10. That was because the children of mage families could inherit the magic circuit of their parents and even their ancestors. Without any flirting or ambiguity, Duque's right index finger slowly moved down the delicate lines of Alucia's face, gently pressing down. After slightly loosening his index finger, the delicate skin and bright red lips trembled and bounced back under the effect of inertia. After an unknown amount of time, the four-faced lips left, panting. Chapter 733. When Mograine was worried that something had happened to Duque and ran back with his guards to look for him, all he saw was a lone figure with tear stains on his face. Where's Miss Barov? I sent her back to Stormwind City. It was only right to send the women and non-combatants away before the battle started. But what was with the tear stains on Duque's face? What was up with the sudden surge in his aura, and the surging elements in his body? Mograine had not seen Duque for more than a decade. Even during the battle where Duque and all of Karazhan had disappeared, Duque and Mograine had fought on different battlefields, one in the north and one in the south. Mograine's impression of Duque was that he had unparalleled intelligence and courage, but was not strong himself. He had never been able to equate Duque with the strong. But now it was different. Even a paladin like him, who was not familiar with the occult, could feel Duque's power. Duque had become a Breaking Dawn wizard? No. Compared to Antonida's, he was still a little lacking. They both had that kind of surging elemental aura, but there seemed to be a difference in quality. Even so, it was still very terrifying. Duque was not even 30 years old yet, right? Holy light above, he still looked like he was 18 years old. Mograine's shock was only limited to this. If he had known that Duque was already immortal, perhaps he would have been truly envious and jealous. Quickly collecting his thoughts, they looked down the mountain. The battle between the Orc army and the Scourge army had reached its climax. The elite Orc warriors from Warsong and Frostwolf formed a 5-kilometer-long battle line, holding off the undead tide that was surging from the north to the south. Under the maintenance of this battle line, further south was the migrating Orc army. Countless Orc women and children carried them on their shoulders and arms, leading the small Orcs as they ran. It would be impossible for a human to pass through the Hillsbrad Plains in such a short time under the attack of the undead creatures. Humans had to bring their families and belongings with them. It was destined that human civilians could rarely travel more than 50 kilometers a day. The Orcs were different. The Orcs used the sky as their blanket, and the earth as their bed. They were used to a life of hunting, so they were not afraid of starving to death even if they were empty-handed. Moreover, many beastmen had just been released from prison, so none of them had any assets. As a result, The speed at which the orc women and children marched was even faster than a fully armed human army. Attack! You bunch of brainless people! Ras Frostwhisper roared. The sole punishment of a high undead made a large number of intermediate undead tremble. They roared and used the shouts from their souls to drive away the zombies, ghouls, and other low-level undead. They were like endless waves that crashed into the orc battle formation. This time, Ras Frostwhisper wasn't the only one who was startled. Even Earthes was startled. Orcs. Those filthy creatures. Earthes's fall was on the spiritual level, but it did not mean that he had been brainwashed. On the contrary, he knew very well how powerful the orcs were. When he was growing up, Uther had made him fight against orc slaves in order to train him. Similarly, before he had fallen, he had also participated in the suppression of the orc uprising. Most importantly, he had personally experienced the battle where Lordaeron's city had almost fallen, and felt the fear that made him feel ashamed and uneasy even to this day. Even though he no longer thought that he had human emotions, the rage of revenge still drove him to make a decision. Arthes waved his hand. The huge black flag began to move. Beside him were hundreds of death knights riding skeletal warhorses. They had all fought alongside Earthes in their lives, from Andoril in Lordaeron all the way to the bone-chilling Northrend. It was only when Earthes pulled out Frostmourne and fell that Earthes took their lives and turned them into elite death knights. As soon as they started their charge, the orcs immediately sensed them. Thrall shouted, "Orgrim, do you have any good ideas? Looks like a very powerful guy is coming." Orgrim glanced at the orc women and children behind him, who still had a third of them, and suddenly turned back. "Thrall, as the future star who will shoulder the heavy responsibility of reviving the orcs, you answer me as a great chieftain in waiting. Will you abandon your people because of the danger?" "No. Never." Thrall's answer was sonorous and powerful. Nearby, Grom, Rexer, and the tens of thousands of orcs who were fighting with passion all smiled at the same time. "Loktar Ogre, if we don't win, we will rather die." How many years had it been? Who knew how many years it had been since the orcs had shouted such a domineering slogan with tens of thousands of people as a unit? At this moment, the old orcs who had experienced the second battle at the Dark Portal felt like crying. It was another series of extremely fierce slashes, and the zombies and ghouls that had rushed to the front of the orc formation fell like wheat being cut down, one by one. At this moment, Arthas's Death Knights charged over. The skeletal warhorses looked so thin that only bones were left, but because they emitted an even denser aura of death, the low-tier undead in their path all retreated. The skeletal warhorses were like icebreakers, easily killing their way to the front of the orc army in just a few minutes. This was a clash without any fancy moves. Would the giant wave break the dam? Or would the dam break the giant wave? The strongest sound since the start of the battle told the world an answer. It was a draw. The orcs were not good at defense. Even though it looked like the orcs were on the defensive side, that was just an illusion. The orcs completely destroyed their enemies to maintain this so-called line of defense. When the Death Knight arrived, the Death Knight would either instantly kill the orc with dark magic, or the orc would use its war hammer that was emitting a faint holy radiance to smash the Death Knight and the skeleton warhorse into dust. The instant confrontation was like a tit against a tat. This was a terrifying way of fighting that seemed more like mutual destruction, and it made the leaders of both sides feel a little pained. "Kill, Loktar." In the blink of an eye, it was a chaotic battle. Just as the Death Knights charged into the battle line, even the Doomsday Army didn't notice that at the southernmost end of the Alterac Mountains, not far away, an army quietly entered. At first, no one noticed this army because outside the army, there was a cold fog that covered a few square kilometers. It felt no different from the Doomsday Army's cold canopy of undead. Chapter 734. By the time the commander of the Calamity Army realized what was going on, they were already less than 2 kilometers away from the Dalajan troops. The ground rumbled. Even the stones on the ground bounced a few centimeters into the air. It was impossible to hide from anyone. It wasn't like there weren't any huge monsters in the Scourge. The cave demons that had been transformed from spider demons were one of them, But they were definitely not as shocked as they were now. No. This is not our army. Dean Jaden, who was commanding the army from the rear, suddenly realized what was going on. At this moment, none of the liches had realized what was going on. The mist suddenly dispersed. An army in crimson armor, like a huge red dragon that had just woken up, showed its claws and teeth to the Calamity troop. For the Holy Light, the 500 paladins of the Silver Hand led the charge. For the peace of the dead, the Knights of Rotterdam waved their weapons that had been blessed with holy light and followed closely behind. Even the Dalajan infantry soldiers who were fighting on the Dalajan city wall 5 kilometers away could clearly hear their battle cry. The people of Dalaran were pleasantly surprised by this army that suddenly appeared behind the Calamity army, as if it was a magic trick. Reinforcements. Thank the heavens! The people of Rotterdam are here. Long live the Alliance. Without reinforcements, they would definitely lose. This was an unchanging truth since the beginning of time. Even magic communication had been cut off. Not to mention the cavalry, even the griffins could not fly out. Looking at the terrifying army of the dead that was like an endless ocean, any ordinary person would quickly lose their courage. If not for the hundreds of mage towers behind them that were constantly using extraordinary power to clean up the monsters, the Dalajan infantry at the front line would have long collapsed. Without any warning, they suddenly welcomed the Scarlet Cross, one of the few powerful reinforcements on the entire continent. The morale of the Dalajan was instantly boosted. On the highest mage tower, Antonidas, who was calculating his mana consumption and using it as rhythmically as possible, was also pleasantly surprised to see this scene. What happened next made Antonidas even happier. Under the command of the Dark Dean, the gargoyles that were hovering in the sky and swooping down from time to harvest the heads of the humans on the city wall began to attack the charging cavalry. Most of the low-level undead creatures were slow. It was impossible for the low-intelligence ghouls, zombies, and skeleton soldiers to instantly turn around and counterattack. Using the gargoyles' countercharge and the cavern demons' long-range attacks to defeat the human cavalry's charge as much as possible was the best solution that Dean Gatton could come up with. Even a veteran general like Mograine could not help but feel his scalp go numb when he saw the gargoyles whizzing through the sky. Knights and cavalry did not have any anti-air capabilities. Even a holy knight's long-range attacks were limited, and the distance was extremely short. Paladins could fight, tank, and heal, but they didn't have any ranged attacks. This was a natural shortcoming that couldn't be fixed. The Rotterdam Kingdom never lacked warriors who would charge head-on into the enemy's air force, but Mograine did not want his men to waste their lives in the hands of the enemy's air force. If the army advanced slowly, they could have the cover of the archers and mages, but they would also lose the chance to launch a surprise attack. It was not that Mograine had never thought of leading the mages to charge on horseback. Unfortunately, most mages did not have the ability to cast spells while moving. Low-level mages had to stop and sense the surrounding elements, and then form a resonance and connection with the elemental realm before slowly chanting spells. By the time they made their move, it would be too late. Fortunately, he had Duque on his side. There was no one in the Alliance who had the two metamagic abilities, high-speed moving casting, and super multicast at the same time. It was generally accepted that in the field of multicast, even the two Breaking Dawn archmages, Antonidas and Anastrian, had to concede defeat to Duque. He just did not know if Duque's skills had become rusty after 10 years. Duque, it's all up to you. Mograine looked at Duque who was charging with him, his eyes filled with undisguised pleading. Leave it to me. The 3 short words were powerful and sonorous. For some reason, the baleful Duque today gave Mograine an abendous and inexplicable sense of trust and security compared to the usual Duque, who always wore a gentle smile. The wind had started blowing. It was a strong wind that was blowing from east to west, the exact opposite of the season. He had thought that the heavens were helping him, but 2 seconds later, Mograine was shocked to find that the source of the wind was actually Duque who was beside him. Not only was there wind, but there was also fire. The Lordaeron horse Duque was riding seemed to panic when it saw the fire beneath its feet, but the mysterious light from Duque's hand quickly calmed the horse, causing it to immediately enter a state of forgetfulness and gallop away. So fast. That was a speed that far surpassed that of a normal arrow. Was that the mage's blazing haste? How could it be so fast? Mograine did not know much about magic. He only knew that there was this meta-magic ability. Of course, he did not know that after the baptism of the storm altar, Duque also had the power of wind and thunder. Under the double acceleration, Duque looked like a stream of light to outsiders. At that moment, one man and one horse empty-handed, Duque charged into the formation of the scourge with a crimson magic light. In front of him, hundreds of ghouls with ruined faces and ferocious fangs surged. On the two wings were venomous spiders thrown by the cave demons, revealing their horrifying mouthparts in midair. In the sky were gargoyles that could easily tear a knight and his horse into pieces when they dove down with their wings tucked between their legs. 3 layers of attacks came at the same time. No matter how brave and courageous the holy knights were, they were all shocked by this scene. In the next moment, they couldn't believe their eyes. Fire. It was fiercer than prairie fire. Fiercer than the fire that burned the sky. The 1024 hands of magic that suddenly appeared in the void raised 1024 fireballs the size of water tanks. Duque raised his head emotionless. A string of familiar yet strange green words poured down from Duque's retina. Yes, with the magic circuit transplanted, Duque straightened out his magic circuit. This was like dredging a river with silt. Of course, using a boat to dig away the silt was a solution, but using a larger amount of water to wash away the silt could also be done, but it was more violent and faster. Previously, when his rank temporarily fell, Duque lacked the magic power to solve the problem. Now that he had an external aid that was not much inferior to his, everything would be easily solved. Lucia, your gift, your love, I Duque have received. Chapter 735. With an ear-piercing whistle, the fireballs around Duque scattered in all directions. It was a terrifying scene, as though a meteor shower had fallen to the ground. Everywhere the fireballs went, there were thunderous explosions. Thunderous explosions resounded, sparks flew in all directions, rocks exploded, and bones and flesh flew everywhere. The scene at the Scorching Canyon 13 years ago seemed to replay itself in Mograine's eyes. Back then, it was only possible for an entire dwarven tank legion to create such a scene. But now Duque had done it all by himself. Perhaps his destructive power was still lacking, but his momentum was definitely not inferior to that of the past. Far away in the south, Orgrim, who had suddenly heard the loud noise from the north, suddenly raised his head. Such a horrified sound naturally made him think of the same thing. The same shocking momentum. The same perfect timing to strike. Even though his vision was limited on the horizon, and he had no time to pay attention to anything else in the fierce battle, Orgrim could not help but mutter a name that had given him nightmares for more than 10 years. Duke Marcus. It was as though a lit fuse had cut into the massive group of undead. With this fuse as the center, all the undead parted to the sides. They were forced to move aside in the form of flesh and bones flying everywhere. Broken human legs, broken spider legs, shattered stone fragments of the gargoyles. That kind of visual impact caused everyone who saw the scene to be shaken to the core. Duque's speed was too fast. A few seconds after he and his horse swept past, the huge fireballs that flew out exploded in the distance. It looked as though the ground had been forcefully plowed open by a huge plow, and the soil fell in all directions. As soon as Duque passed, there was a series of explosions behind him, and the undead formation was in disarray. Charging head-on with the enemy's spear formation was the worst strategy. Even if the enemy's back was facing them, it was not advantageous for them to charge if they stood too closely together. After all, there were many huge creatures among the undead, such as the cavern demons that were almost 2 men tall. If they were to collide with them head-on, it would definitely result in the deaths of both men and horses. Only with the right amount of sparseness was the best place for the cavalry to display their might. Seeing the gaps in the Doomsday Army's defense line, Mograine and Abendis shouted at the same time. Good. Duque had never been a cavalry commander for even a day, but he had long understood the true meaning of military formations after years of leading troops. If the Scarlet Cross could not grasp such a perfect opening, then they would be letting down their reputation as elites. The Dark Dean Gatling, the man who had taken over the Bara family's fortress and turned Caer Darrow into the base of the Cursed Gods cult. The man who turned Scholomance into a true academy, screamed in pain. No. In the absence of Kel Thuzad, he and Ras Frostwhisper were competitors. Lys represented the Scourge, but he was more inclined towards Kel Thuzad's direct line of descent. Just now, when Rhys couldn't take down the Beastmen, he was happy to watch the show, but now it was his turn to suffer. He didn't dare to imagine what would happen if he were to squander the army right after Earthes, the King of Death, handed it over to him. How would Earthes deal with him later? In the heart of Lich King Nazul, Earthes's position was much higher than that of Kel Thuzad, the dark wizard with a damaged soul. What's more, Kel Thuzad had been killed by Earthes and hadn't been resurrected yet. Gatling could see that Duque was the key to the entire human army. As long as he killed Duque, he was 70% sure that he could take a breather and then swallow this human army. He couldn't watch any longer, so he made a decisive move. 7 continuous, incomparably gorgeous flashes allowed him to cross over a distance of more than a kilometer, and in an instant he reached Duque's side. Not good. The layman watched the show, while the expert saw the artistry. Duque's sea of fireballs looked incomparably gorgeous, and he could almost single-handedly deal with half of the Scourge army. In the eyes of experts, Duque was actually a scumbag with a little bit of cleverness. Why? Because Duque only used low-level Flame Blast. Even Antonidas, who was watching this scene through the magician's eye, was fooled by Duque's seemingly gorgeous but actually weak methods. The veteran Breaking Dawn wizard subconsciously thought that Duque had been seriously injured while rushing back from the void. In fact, this was indeed the case. However, no one would have thought that Duque had used Elusia's magic circuit to resurrect with full energy. At this moment, Duque looked like he had the power of a peak morning star. The name of the best actor Duque was not just for show. Die. Gatling flashed over, and the first thing he did was sacrifice. He didn't even notice the trace of mockery at the corner of Duque's mouth. Mirror image of truth activated. The only thing Gatling's demonic flames burned was the poor horse. In the next moment, the light of flash lit up behind Gatling. Not good. I've been tricked. The elemental undulations that suddenly erupted from Duque didn't seem like that of a weak morning star wizard. This was clearly a radiant moon who was at the same level as Gatling. And not just any ordinary radiant moon, but one that was about to step into Breaking Dawn, a half-step Breaking Dawn wizard. Gatling's intestines turned green with regret. Why had he courted death? He'd actually been so hot-headed as to personally deal with someone else's trump card. Those who could charge alone were either idiots who only had courage left in their minds, or people with shocking strength. Evidently, the other party was the latter. Without any hesitation, Gatling flashed as well. Who knew that a scene that scared Gatling out of his wits would appear? A radiant moon wizard could flash more than 100 meters away. Gatling could jump more than 200 meters with his full strength. With a radius of 200 meters, this was an extremely large range. He never expected that at the spot he'd set up, the same radiance of flash would light up almost at the same time. That's right. Duque's vengeful spirit had caught up. This is impossible. Gatling cried out in alarm. It was impossible for other mages to do so. Sensing such minute magical undulations from a warlock who was a wizard and used the power of darkness in the canopy of necromancy that was filled with the aura of death? This is impossible. As if to confirm his thoughts, Gatling once again activated Flash, and then let out another cry of despair. The combination of Duque and the system elf made the impossible possible. In Duque's retina, coupled with the holographic image in his mind that had been scanned and marked by the system, Duque could clearly see every magical undulation that belonged to Dean Gatling in the surrounding space. This final boss of Scholomance, one of Kel Thuzad's left and right arms, was just a dancing clown in the palm of Duque's eyes. Die. Bigby threw out a series of demonic punches. This cursing sect boss, who had yet to completely abandon his human body, was actually beaten to death by Duque amidst thousands of troops in front of countless beings. Chapter 736. Who asked you to play with curses and sneak attacks? Suddenly, with a Bigby's flying slap, Ganding's chest collapsed. Who asked you to be a dog of the dead instead of a living person? With another Bigby's Vajra fist, Ganding's face was crooked. Who asked you to occupy my woman's home and play disco dance on her grave? With another Bigby's shattering palm, Ganding's tortoise head was directly smashed into his chest. As the saying went, only Pharaoh understood Pharaoh the best. The sorcerer who had turned into a sorcerer had as many control skills as the stars in the sky. Flash, icicle, ring of ice, sheep transformation, fear. However, when Duque attacked so quickly that Ganding couldn't use any control skills, the fastest way to break his mage shield was not elemental attacks, but the most violent physical damage. The most ruthless part of the Bigby's Pig Hands series, oh no, the Magic Fist series, was that it turned elemental damage into physical damage. This directly killed Ganding, who had set his mage shield to anti-elemental damage early on. If Ganding knew that the person in front of him was Duque, the most active hero of the Alliance in the Battle of the Dark Portal more than 10 years ago, he would never have rashly come to kill him. However, Duque had been missing for 10 years. How many people would pay attention to a former hero who had been missing for 10 years, and had been determined to be a dead man in battle? Even Kel Thuzad had only casually mentioned Duque's name. This time, Ganding's death was not unjust. Ah! Accompanied by Ganding's vague scream, the chain of command of the Northern and Eastern Legion of the Scourge Army surrounding the Dalajan broke. No matter what era, in any form of army, killing a commander was a very taboo thing. The Scourge Army was terrifying, and the low-level undead were not afraid of death, but they also lacked wisdom and needed a commander. As the middle-level commander of the Scourge Army, the Lich and the Death Knight did not appear out of thin air. It was not like finding a farmer, and killing him could turn him into a Lich. It wasn't like finding a soldier, and using dark magic to transform him into a Death Knight. The strength of an Undying was directly proportional to the strength of his soul, when he was alive. The current Scourge Army was not the same as the one that had wiped out the Dalajan and Kuel Salas. At that time, the Scourge Army was truly terrifying. There were countless Liches and Death Knights that turned into mages. Due to the fact that they did not completely devour the Rotterdam city, many of the elites of the Rotterdam kingdom took the opportunity to escape by boat. Other than the Arachne army, Arthas' Scourge army was lacking in many parts. Even the commander could only be transferred from Kel Thuzad's cursing sect. Dark Dean Gardine was killed by Duque, and there was suddenly a lack of a big shot who could really unify the opinions of the Liches. The Doomsday Army was obviously in chaos. They had lost Gadon, and could not contact Arthas. At this moment, Arthas was surrounded by a few Horde heroes. Some led the Undying under their command to continue attacking. Some wanted to change the main direction of the army and counterattack the Scarlet Cross army. And some chose to retreat into Lake Lordamir after not receiving any new orders. One could imagine the chaos of the Scourge army. From the dead Dark Dean Gardine, Duque took the Dean's staff, which was known as one of the 7 weapons of the past. It was a staff with a goat horn demon skull at the top, and a few layers of bone spikes at the top and tail of the staff. It was quite an evil-looking staff. The biggest feature of this staff was enlightenment. After the effect was activated, it could increase the intelligence of all allies within the range of the halo. Its significance was that it could allow magic apprentices to safely use the temporarily increased intelligence to experience higher-level magic when their own intelligence was not up to the standard. If Duque wanted to recruit disciples in the future, the Dean's staff was indeed a good thing. Of course, the skull was too much of an eyesore. Well, it was just like when I played games with Duque. A certain bastard warrior named Recruit would go around using the Dean's staff to increase the intelligence of other mages. Duque usually did not have a use for this staff. That little bit of intelligence was nothing to Duque. After throwing the Dean's staff into the storage pouch given to him by Elugia, Duque stood with his hands behind his back. In less than a minute, the Scarlet Cross Army's cavalry had already rushed past him. Like the legendary miracle of a sword splitting the sea, the blood-red torrent rushed to Duque's side, and consciously parted to the left and right. Long live Lord Marcus. We salute you, the great hero of the Alliance. As they rushed past, some knights did not forget to greet Duque. Duque had never been a knight, let alone a holy knight. But now many knights in the army had grown up listening to the deified deeds of Duque. Many people had wondered if there really was such a powerful pharaoh who could change the situation of a battle by himself. Today, with their own eyes, they witnessed the return of this legendary figure who was like a myth. They only had one thought in their minds. His reputation was well-deserved. As a mage he led the charge. 1 man and 1 horse. Yet an army of 10,000 could not stop him. He seemed weak. Yet he took the head of the enemy's general as easily as taking something out of his pocket. Fortunately, Duque did not single-mindedly continue to kill. Otherwise, the 80,000 elite soldiers would have come to do nothing, and the Scarlet Cross army would have lost all face. Kill. Smash these broken bones. After Duque used the last of his magic power to shoot down the few gargoyles in the sky, the blood-red tide easily divided, destroyed, and crushed the scattered undead army. After an unknown amount of time, the Scarlet Cross army finally met up with the Dalajan army that had rushed out of the city. Duque. Where is Duque? Riding on a spotless white horse, using the ice element to repel all impurities, Antonida's appearance was getting more and more flashy. Escorted by a group of high-ranked mages and knights, Antonidas eagerly rushed to see Duque. On a small hill, Duque welcomed Antonidas with a Bendis on his left and Mograine on his right. Oh my god! Am I really seeing a ghost? Duque, you're actually still alive. Duque was a little embarrassed. The next second, Antonida's words made Duque a little unhappy. If the one who came to warn us wasn't Mediv, that guy who might have been blinded by the devil, but you, the Dalajan, wouldn't have suffered such heavy losses. Sigh, why didn't you come back earlier? This was not a joke, but a real complaint. Chapter 737. Why did people often say that he was senile? When people got older, their bodily functions would decline. Many times, they would have a different way of dealing with things than when they were young. Before Duque traveled to this world, there was a psychological study. If a person did not try something that he thought was terrible before the age of 30, there was a 90% chance that he would not try it again after the age of 30. For example, bungee jumping. The Antonidas who appeared in front of Duque looked even older. Wrinkles crawled up every corner of his face. Although his eyes were still lively, the twinkle in his eyes told everyone that he was suspicious. You people from Lordaeron are only here now. Are you waiting for the Dalajan to kneel before you come to reap the rewards? You, Duque, did not come earlier or later. Arthas killed his father here, and you're already here? Seeing Antonida's gaze, Duque's heart skipped a beat. There were not many decades in one's life. 10 years might pass in a flash in the eyes of young people, but in the eyes of old people, it was extremely long. On the way here, it was not that Duque did not hear from Wuxia about the filthy affairs of Lordaeron. In the past 10 years, the kingdom of Lordaeron had annexed the old territory of Alterac in order to expand their territory. In order to support his son, Tyrrhenus stripped Uther of his title indiscriminately, because Uther opposed Arthas' slaughter of the orphanage. The Dalajan had begun to play closed door, refusing to export mages to other countries. King Garen of Stormguard was acting recklessly. Gilneas had closed the country. 10 years of open and secret strife was enough to wear away the camaraderie that had accumulated in the alliance against the Horde. The only fortunate thing was that the reconstruction and development of the Kingdom of Stormwind and Cosmodin in the southern continent was quite good. At least the military framework of the alliance had been preserved. In the face of Antonida's rebuke, Duke was neither humble nor pushy. Karazhan is surrounded by countless spatial rifts in the void. It was not easy for me to find a gap, and I just rushed back. Mograine quickly tried to smooth things over. Lord Antonidas, now is not the time to blame anyone. We can slowly figure out who is at fault for this disaster later. Don't you think that the first thing we need to deal with is the King of the Dead, who claims to want to turn the entire continent into Lordaeron's territory? Both Duque and Antonida's eyelids twitched. This wasn't the nearly immortal life of the elves, but the taboo of the walking of the dead. Let a group of ghost-like monsters kill all the living and rule the world? Other than those cursing sect cultists who had lost their minds for immortality, who else would do such a thing? In the face of the larger conflict of life and death, the dirty matters between countries could only be regarded as small conflicts. Like pebbles on the roadside, they could only be thrown aside. Antonidas narrowed his eyes, wrinkles appearing at the corners of his eyes. He pursed his lips. Are we going to join forces with those green-skinned monsters? Apart from the pitiful youths who hadn't experienced the first or second battle of the Dark Portal, no one in the Alliance would have a good impression of the Beastmen. Cooperate? If we can't defeat Arthas, that scum who killed his own father, then I will consider it. Antonidas was about to say something, but Duque's next words made him lose his temper. At least the Beastmen are living people, aren't they? Do you want to see the Beastmen get killed by the Scourge, and turn into stronger zombies to attack the Dalajan? Everyone smiled bitterly. The undead calamity hadn't been around for long. As the frontline commanders, they had figured out the pattern. Those who were strong in life would be strong after death. If the zombies that the civilians turned into after death were trash, then the Beastmen zombies had at least 50 combat power. If Arthas slaughtered all the Beastmen now, it would be bad. The leaders of the Alliance looked at each other, and immediately came to a consensus. Just as the bugler was about to blow the horn, Duque said, "After that, use this horn and blow this." Duque magically took out a giant horn that was obviously Beastman style. Woo woo woo. At first, the Alliance had no problem with it. However, the Alliance immediately realized that something was wrong. This seemed to be the Beastman's horn. Everyone looked at the bugler on the hill who was blowing the giant Beastman horn. They really didn't know what the Alliance leaders were doing. Stop looking. The commander of this battle is Duke Marcus. Do you think you can understand Lord Marcus's plan? The middle-level commanders scolded the soldiers below. On the central battlefield, a few kilometers away, the 4 Horde heroes were engaged in a fierce battle with Arthas, Thrall, Rexer, Grom, and Orgrim. These 4 Horde heroes were definitely fierce people who could fight against 1,000 men. The 4 of them ganged up on Arthas. They thought that they could take him down no matter what. The Death Knights first appeared in the Horde. As a monster created by Gul'dan, Orgrim was still a little wary. He knew about the skills of the Death Knights. However, as the most powerful Death Knight under the command of Lich King Nazul, Arthas with Frostmourne was far more powerful than Orgrim had imagined. Corpse manipulation made the surrounding Beastman warriors attack the 4 Horde heroes instead. Evil Aura increased the movement speed and attack speed of nearby undead allies. The most disgusting was Death Coil. Many times, Arthas' armor had already been smashed, and even his body had been injured. With an extreme Death Coil, a besieging Beastman would immediately fall. At first, Orgrim thought that these were just spells. He even had a few newly trained shamans try to interrupt Arthas with all kinds of shock. Later, he sadly found out that it was a suicide mission. On the battlefield full of corpses and the living, Arthas was simply invincible. Of course, the most terrifying thing was the Frostmourne, that emitted a strange and terrifying aura. Orgrim saw with his own eyes that a shaman who was killed by this magic sword turned into a zombie. Even his soul was sucked into this evil rune magic sword, unable to reincarnate. At first, Orgrim and Grom could suppress Arthas with their superb martial arts. Who knew that this former prince of Lordaeron was also a true martial arts genius? After a dozen rounds, they were evenly matched with Orgrim and Grom. After 50 rounds, if it wasn't for Thrall's sudden attacks and Rexer's occasional battle pets to block Arthas' killer moves, at least one of Grom or Orgrim would have been defeated. This can't go on. Just when the 4 Horde heroes were in a difficult situation, they suddenly heard a strange horn sound that belonged to the Horde. You're tuning in to the Lime's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.